Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a CARNO-SERIOUS edition of Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Gnashing teeth. Giant monsters.
Oh, yeah. No, there's some giant monsters that are going to be discussed in this episode.
Well, I hope so.
Yes.
And speaking of large monsters, who are you, sir?
Right on the nose. I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm SHAWN SHERIDAN.
I'm Larry Stroth.
And I'm James GONIS.
And for this episode, we are going to discuss the work of a gentleman that I met not too long ago, who I didn't know really when I was speaking to him that we were already friends due to his work. And the topic is...
What is it?
CARNOSAUR Knowledge, a guide to filmmaking with Adam Simon.
Dinosaur knowledge!
CARNOSAUR Knowledge with Adam Simon! Now, here's the problem, though.
What's the problem?
We tried like hell to find Adam Simon. I met him and then he just disappeared. So Rich Little happened to be within Zoom distance, and he does an amazing Adam Simon.
No.
And
It's perfect.
that's a lie. Guess what?
Yes.
Guess what? Our guest, he's an acclaimed writer, director, producer, actor. Yes.
Oh, God.
And he's a dead ringer for Adam Simon. It's Adam Simon.
Adam Simon. Oh,
Thank you.
Welcome.
Oh, welcome to
Mr.
Monster Party.
Mr.
Yes.
Carnosaur. Mr.
Oh,
Carnosaur.
Oh.
We are so
If
thrilled
you
to have
only
you.
knew the trauma, what's the term? The trigger warning that I should have just when the word carnosaur is said.
Well,
I'm actually over it now. It's fine. It's good. It's okay.
Well, you know what?
For years,
Adam.
that was like, I mean, that was the definition of post-traumatic stress syndrome. It was
We're so sorry. And
we'll come back.
but
to
isn't
that.
it nice that you see like these are four guys who love this movie? And I remember like when I first met you, and we're just talking. This was at a dinner party at our mutual friend of the show, Jake Johansson.
Jake.
And we're at Jake and Belinda's, and we're having a nice meal, and we're talking films. And then it comes up that you wrote and directed Carnosaur.
Wrote and directed.
And my jaw hit the ground, and I was just like, "What?" And you were kind of a little, like a little standoffish about it. And I was like, no. Carnosaur is a fucking great movie.
And
It is.
Yes.
And you worked this was like a Roger Corman thing. I mean, to
was.
go
So
through
many
the
touchstones.
grind. And
Yeah.
my understanding is, a Corman film would have a few days. You had a little more. This was kind of a big deal. It seems like you put your all into this.
How did Carnosaur happen? Tell us the story. How did the magic of Carnosaur?
Magic of Carnosaur. Well, first I got to say I have gotten over it, and now I can be pleased and proud of it. But particularly because yes, I meet people all the time who do have a strange, even perverse affection for that movie,
Like us.
Yes.
like you guys,
Yeah.
and most importantly, I see that it did do what I guess I would have and did hope at the time it would do, which is in particular, there's a younger generation. You guys are a bit younger than me, and then I think there's a full younger generation cohort behind you guys for whom it's a real touchstone from their childhood, in the same way that certain truly transcendently bad movies from my childhood and some transcendently wonderful movies from mine really were hallmarks, including like Corman movies that I was seeing,
Sure.
on Svengoolie or Creature Features or whatever, let alone, whatever, Edgar Ulmer or whatever, grade B and Z movies. So the fact that a generation kind of grew up with it, in fact, what first got me to be accepting of it as a piece of not just my juvenilia, but of my life's work was that my favorite actor, actually you should never say your favorite actor in something, but in something you've done. But I'm going to go ahead at the risk that probably nobody else in the cast will be listening to this. He's the only one who might be. My favorite actor in Salem, one of the favorite things I've ever done, who I respected from every perspective, Seth Gable. It took him like the whole first season to finally be able to corner me and admit his and his cousin / best friend's lifelong obsession with Carnosaur because they had seen it as kids, and then got the VHS from Blockbuster again and again, and how in fact it was like the scariest thing they'd ever seen, but also the thing they loved the most, and how they had even made up a song about it.
No.
To get themselves through it when they were like 10 or whatever it was, and he proceeded to sing for me the Carnosaur song. So I was like, okay, I can now finally accept this piece of my past, and dug into my closet where I still had a fat roll of Carnosaur posters from 1992 or whatever
93.
it was, and 93. Thank you.
Yes.
And passed it on. Yeah. So I wouldn't even know where to begin with the tale of Carnosaur itself is a horror story. Yes.
Yeah, I will say that, like, this was, Corman, of course, who, so prolific through decade after decade. And by the time he got to the 90s with Concord Pictures, he was churning out a lot of these and executive producing a lot of these. But there was always certain movies that just stood out or rose above some of the typical fare that this stuff, and like I think Carnosaur was one of them. Like just, and I know I want to hear from you, but I know this. I was fascinated to learn about how it was based on a book before the Jurassic Park book.
Yeah,
it came out before Jurassic Park and all that. How that kind of happened, Well,
it's okay. Well, I'll back it up because I was sort of at the end of my. Certainly, as far as Roger was concerned, it was a great acknowledgement from him to me that he was asking me, in effect, to come back and do Carnosaur, because had sort of exited. I'd sort of graduated from what we used to all call the Roger Corman School of Film.
Right.
Of course, I had tried to graduate like sort of almost after every film I did there, which would end up, then I'd be like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm never doing that again. And then we'll come back to that because it does go to the guide to filmmaking and some of the Simon rules for young filmmakers, like, be careful what you turn down. You may be doomed to write and direct the sequel. Come back to that. But yes, Sean, what you're saying, obviously Roger, is a colossus in especially genre film history, but especially in the last few generations, really the generation before mine, he was even more than that because of, as we know, the whole generation of directors. Almost everybody in that boomer generation, from Scorsese to Cameron, and if they weren't directing, they were editing. And it's Joe Dante, and it's John Sayles,
Bogdanovich, all this,
Jonathan Demme,
Demme, absolutely, and we can and Arkush, and I mean, it's you'd be hard pressed, and even the ones who didn't, kind of did or were frustrated. Lucas in his own way. Spielberg was frustrated; he didn't, So he had created that whole generation. So by the time I was into my teens or 20s with the vision that I wanted to make films, certainly the idea that somehow Roger would come to you or you would somehow end up in that orbit seems certainly like the holy yellow brick road to recognition, to be able to somehow actually do this thing that, especially back then, I think seemed even more impossible than it does now, in an era when, and I'm talking about my case in the 70s, growing up, when it was a weird thing to be in the Midwest and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to make movies, or here's my little wind up 8mm camera, and yes, I'm setting my soldiers on fire and filming them. The generation did, right? Or speaking of books, a generation for whom being obsessed with movies meant 3/4 of that meant movie books, right? Because you couldn't see movies.
Right. Sure.
No VCRs, let alone DVDs, let alone streaming, nothing. I mean, if you had told me then that there would someday be stores like bookstores where you could walk into and every movie ever made would be there, and then they would disappear again, I would. What foul magic is this? Anyway, we'll come back to that and come back to the fact that history changes. That's the nature of a history. So that I don't to work for Roger in the Concord period, in the final, well, you never say final, the guy's still working. He's going to
Sure, yeah.
I know.
You're going to be, producing Feelies in the 23rd century and doing them cheaper than anybody else.
Exactly.
But there was a big change, which is historically an interesting one to talk about. And I can date it almost exactly because it happened very much around my first Corman film, Brain Dead, of the transition within Hollywood of why the few of us that did get through that system didn't find anybody waiting for us when we opened that door, because the world had changed in a ton of interesting ways. But anyway, so the run up to Carnosaur was really, I was still a film student and had made a short film, but that had managed to get a bunch of attention in the way that shorts did back then via a student screening, like a USC or UCLA screening, and get agents and this and that and the what have yous of it, and got approached by Corman, sort of right away. And I wasn't finished with school. I was still in school, but he, it really is a story about Brain Dead. And so I won't get into that. I found a script sitting on the doorstep of my apartment in East Hollywood then, that I could see had the Concord Roger Corman insignia on it. I'm like, what is this? A bit like the Willy Wonka golden ticket or whatever. And I could tell it was a script. And I opened it up and it's this a Xerox of like 150-page script that you could see was typewritten, not word processed, because you could see, what the typeface looked like and all that. And it said Paranoia by Charles Beaumont. And if you're a genre literature fan, I was a huge Beaumont fan.
Yeah.
So I was stunned and freaked out. I'm like, what could this be? And then was thinking, but wait, Beaumont's dead. How is this a Beaumont script?
Right.
We can come back and talk later or another time about that. That eventually became the movie Brain Dead.
I'm fascinated.
We can talk about Brain Dead.
Yes. That movie's amazing
because it leads into Carnosaur.
And the cast of that film is incredible too. It's such a unique, bizarre movie.
We had to fight a lot for that cast. It was a great. No, not to this day, because unfortunately one of the Bills is no longer with us, which is a great tragedy. Bill Paxton is not. But both of them, I think, blamed me, at least jokingly, for years of the fact that they seem to be doomed to have their names confused. The Paxton, and particularly after they appeared in that film together. So, God knows. But that was my introduction to Roger. And I realized only later that it was a pretty exceptional one in the sense that traditionally, both in the generation before that and in my generation, you'd go to work for Roger as an editor or a sub-editor or an assistant editor or as the copy boy or as
editing trailers or
whatever.
Something.
Editing trailers was a huge one, or doing PR, like Wynorski did and lots of the other guys had, In fact, typically the best folks there did come out of the ad conception department, like Jim, who's has many great films like Dinosaur Island, speaking of Carnosaur, made with all of our naked women plus leftover footage from Carnosaur. Jim's greatest accomplishment was he's the one, I don't know if you know this, he's the one who came up with the line that I remember hearing as a kid on the radio that obsessed me and all my friends for years. You will see a man turned inside out.
Screamers. Also known as Island of the Fishman.
Exactly. Apparently got it. Roger used to complain about that because I remember when I realized that, saying to Roger, that was the greatest thing ever on ski. He's like, yeah, except there wasn't anything like that in the movie. And I actually had to go spend money and shoot something like that because the ad got so much play. Anyway, so to get invited over there to suddenly write and direct something without having made my way through the Corman school up to that point was a gift and a curse, as it was. But anyway, so yes, I'm proud that in retrospect, in that late period of Corman's career, I had two of, I think, his last three, or it might have been the very last two theatrical releases he ever did in a period that he had utterly shifted to video, essentially, by that time. But both Brain Dead and Carnosaur had what was, for the day, pretty expansive theatrical releases, and Times Square. They got to play in Times Square when Times Square was Times Square.
Wow. Can you give like in a nutshell, if you even can, the premise of Brain Dead, because it's such a bizarre movie? Well,
so Beaumont, to back it up, was part of that circle with Richard Matheson, arguably Ray Bradbury, a handful of genius mid-century American genre writers who were all in and around LA, who had a real golden period of writing for pulps and then the slicks and novels and being both mainstream and genre, but also writing a lot for TV and movies. And in particular, Matheson and Beaumont, as you guys surely know, wrote a ton of Twilight Zones.
Yep.
Like almost like a third each, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Beaumont has a large number of the greatest ones. And they also wrote a lot for Roger, who was good friends with both of them in that period. So Matheson wrote, and Beaumont, but some of the Poe adaptations.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They were all very close.
And Matheson and Beaumont co-wrote Burn Witch Burn.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Lots of great scripts. And I think in a funny way, it was a great, you know, there's a whole tradition there that I don't think has been articulated well enough. Someone should write somebody needs to go off and write a book about it, about that sort of mid-century Southern California fantastic. Because it's not just horror, but that includes particularly those three guys, Bradbury, Matheson, Beaumont, you know, in their various ways, who were very tight, and the influence that had on kind of everything that we've all done ever since then, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But Roger and Beaumont, by the way, were particularly close because Beaumont had written his one kind of what the outer world would have thought of as his serious American novel, The Intruders, which became, in fact, Roger's one and only, in a way, kind of intentionally serious, artistic, fuck the genre, to hell with marketing movies, also called The Intruders.
With Shatner, right?
With Shatner.
Yeah, that's right. That's
flop.
an amazing film.
A huge flop for him. But
and the whole critically, thing Roger was like, I'm never going to do that again, because it's the only movie he lost money on. He would say, was the one thing he truly did. It's a good movie. Yes, and a radical movie for its time about race and sex and the South and politics, and it ticked off all these things. I mean, there's a lot to be seen in that movie and in kind of the ways Roger, what his life, that other part of the multiverse where that movie got celebrated at Cannes and celebrated and then led him to being a completely different person. Where he then would have made a whole different slew of movies in the 60s and 70s, where he would have been more, you know, he would have been, I don't know, like a Hal Ashby or somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
He skirted that, because wasn't he involved with distributing the 400 Blows in America?
He distributed other than Janus, he was the distributor of art films, and in many ways as significant as Janus. Not just that, he was close with Bergman and did all the mid-period Bergman, much of the mid-period Fellini, Truffaut, all those guys.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an accident, but I mean, it's because that is who he was, because he's one of the most intelligent, intellectual, you know, artistic people in the business you'd ever meet. And so he's super literate and all that, but also, much like other popular artists of the mid-century, he was being already celebrated in Europe in ways that he couldn't be here. So he would be going to those places and hanging out with those guys, and also getting love from them in ways he was not, obviously, for his AIP movies here. So no, there was always,
I would say that the Poe movies were, I think, where he was elevated. You really saw in those films how good of a filmmaker he was, because they're beautiful, they're gorgeous.
Well, especially like if you look at Usher, which is probably the masterpiece of those, the Fallout, I think it's the Fallout Usher, which is, I mean, so strange and gorgeous, and really is, might as well be a European art movie. Also, I think that's the one it's the cinematographer is Nicholas Roeg.
Right.
It's filled with the aura of the European art film, and at very minimum of the really strange European genre films of that same period, Bava and earlier.
Right. Oh yeah, very much so.
You know, who he was really good friends with. I'll tell you later a great Bava story he told me, because he knew I was a Bava fan. He can never forgive Mario. Because, I'll tell you quickly. Around the time when he was finishing, I think it was Usher, Bava had just finished and delivered Danger Diabolique, one of my favorite.
Oh my God!
Ones from a great comic strip. And they were having lunch in Rome or London or wherever cool place they were, and they were celebrating the fact. And Bava is saying to him, yes, that he had just finished the movie and had finished it, you know, even though it was meant to be this big like 007 style epic, but he'd had only typical Bava schedule, whatever it been, 7 days, 8 days, done all the effects himself. He said, and I came in under budget. and Roger's telling me, Roger said, so, and I said to him, Mario, what did you do with the money? Mario said, Roger, what do you mean? I gave it back to Alberto, you know. And Roger's like, and I'm sitting there going, Mario, you idiot. You fool. He's like, you could have made it. And he proceeded to tell Mario the story that he had already told the rest, all of us who worked for him many, many times, about how when he finished Little Shop of Horrors and still had a third of the money left, he didn't give the money back. He finished that in a day and then made Bucket of Blood the next day with the rest of the money.
Right.
He's like, Mario, what were you doing?
That's like The Terror, I think, was made after
Yes, right.
days. He had to car off for a few more days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, Bucket of Blood is a way better movie than.
Well, that's the beauty. Look, there's a whole paradox in them, because that is the free one. There's always, there's a classic Hollywood story was about, I think it's King Vidor, and Thalberg, like in the 20s and 30s, that established an idea that many other directors then carried on, of who were studio directors, of like, one for you, one for me. One for you, one for me, in the sense of one that's for the studio in effect, but then you're going to let me do the slightly more personal one.
Right.
In Vidor's case, they were all huge hits, so it didn't matter. Even within Roger's own head, there's some of those movies you can kind of feel like he was doing that himself. And particularly in the AIP ones, you could see that, because he's doing theirs and then he's quickly doing his, with the leftovers and the trimmings in effect. And they're better. I agree. Bucket of Blood is a much better movie than Little Shop of Horrors. And what a better musical it would make too.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
It's true. Absolutely.
Surprised he hasn't done it. Anyway, so Beaumont and he were very close. Beaumont, and again, you have to remember, Beaumont's working with him during the prime. This is even it would have been early New World. I guess it was still New World, or was really whatever he was in that transition from one to the other, but where he was still making many of his own films and his most radical movies, I would say. Von Richthofen and Brown. I mean, his other most, or even with the, what was it, Gas,
right, yeah.
Right, where he's almost being kind of
counterculture.
Yeah.
So he was doing that in that period. So this script was written for him in that period, at the early side of that period.
Oh, wow.
And Beaumont, I don't know if you know the story, had some obscure, strange disease that killed him in his mid-30s.
Oh, wow.
Maybe 36, 37. Wow. And it's this freakish disease where it's like you age like 50 years, like in a year or something.
Oh my gosh.
Like that. I mean, it's like something out of a Twilight Zone, right?
Exactly.
So he died really tragically young. I mean, if that guy had not, he would be a much better known huge giant of the culture.
Oh yeah.
But he had written this in that last year he was alive, with the idea that Roger was going to do it, and maybe it would be like his last gasp for both of them, because Roger was kind of transitioning to producing. And it never got made, in part because Charles died before he could ever even rewrite it. That's why it was like a 150-page script. And Roger was never going to try to shoot. He had strict rules about length, and definitely the 150-page script was not one of them. And I think the script had just lain there forgotten for many years, for probably 30 years, until his wife, Julie, who always had an interesting career alongside his and was involved in more of the more artistic side of the label, right? With some of the later Truffaut movies. And she's really the producer, for example, on Boxcar Bertha, the first Scorsese movie. So this was something she was looking for something to do, and she found this script in one of their, drawers, just sitting there, like literally the onion skin papered draft. And asked Roger, what is this? And he's like, oh, Beaumont wrote this and we never did it. Da-da.
Wow.
And I think her assistant at the time, who went on to be a very smart executive elsewhere, Matt Leipzig, had seen this short of mine and said, oh, I know a guy who would be good for this.
So how much did it have to be changed or updated, for him to make a movie then?
Oh, well, a ton. I mean, partly because of the scale of it, but also, so I don't know how well you know Beaumont's work. I mean, when I read it, you recognize right away that it has great resonance with one of his most famous Twilight Zone episodes and one of his most famous short stories, Perchance to Dream, which deals with the whole issue of what's dream and what's not, and basically, in short, about a guy who goes to a shrink because of these horrible nightmares that are killing him, in effect. And it has a final O. Henry-like twist ending. And in effect, he had taken that basic premise and written it to kind of great and surreal length for Roger to do, but really having a lot of fun. And it was in a very wacky, at times almost Monty Pythonish kind of way, dream scene after dream scene after dream scene. So the biggest thing, besides scaling it differently, was that, it was written in the mid 60s. And his point of reference was entirely psychiatry and psychoanalysis, especially quite Freudian psychoanalysis. With both he and Roger and that whole crew, they were deep into Freud.
Right.
Roger was always in therapy, and he loved to talk about Freud, and he was a deep intellectual. I mean, and like a lot of now if you think about psychiatry, you're thinking chemistry, you're thinking pills,
Yeah.
and, you know what I mean, and or you're thinking neurology in the brain. This is classic, really 1950s
Old school
style,
yeah.
old school.
Yeah.
So that was my main thing that I said to Roger and Julie was like, I think this is great, and I love that idea, and I worship at the altar of Charles Beaumont. But I don't think the audience today has the point of reference of psychoanalysis in any way, shape, or form. And I was very enamored. My heroes at the time, in a way, outside of that little realm, were on the one hand probably Cronenberg, who was still up in that kind of Videodrome scanners period, his prime period, and on the book level, probably Philip K. Dick. And so I saw it as having elements of both of those. And in my mind, it was like, I'm going to do a kind of Cronenbergian, Dickian take on this, but which came down to saying to those guys, it has to be about the brain. It can't be about the mind
right.
in that way, because we're in a different kind of scientific materialist period, and people don't believe in the ego and the id. The idea that you might actually get lost in your id. Most people are like, I don't even know what is the id. Or Forbidden Planet. Remember that? Monsters?
Yes.
Monsters.
Sure, yeah.
You couldn't make monsters from the id now, because people would be like, what's the
id?
What's the id? But I felt like people did have this sense about the brain. That was really becoming a thing in at the turn of the 80s and into the 90s, So
if you're talking about like the physical organ of the brain, that's also more body horror, more Cronenberg too.
Exactly. And I wanted it to have that body horror, brain horror, not just body, but literally brain horror. Down to, the first image I had for it that I was determined we would do, and we got to do, and it's one of the things that still is quite striking in that movie, especially because we got away with using a real human brain.
Oh, wow.
Which we had to bury later, and nearly got.
Wait, you had to bury the brain?
We had to pay for a proper burial.
Oh my
God.
Roger was not happy because that was not in the budget.
I can see now. You had to bury the brain.
I had read something about how, you guys probably know this because you look like brain experts. If you do most kinds of serious brain surgery, you don't get any anesthetic.
Right.
You have to be awake, right?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
They can be like talking to you, and they're like
they
filling
have to
on
be
your brain.
talking to you because that's how they know if they're fucking up and turning you into a vegetable.
Oh, that's messed up, man. I'm not having my brain messed with.
That's why I like that scene, the best scene in almost one of the best scenes in all of Thomas Harris's work, the scene in the Hannibal book, which is pretty good in the movie too, where he's feeding the guy piece of and I remember people at the time going, that's completely ridiculous and implausible. I'm like, no, that's very plausible.
Yeah, I know.
That's the best scene in the movie.
And not know you were eating your own slices of your own brain.
It's Ray Liotta, right?
Yeah, Ray Liotta.
And like when he's cooking it, and Ray Liotta goes, that smells good.
That's the best scene in the movie.
You're right.
It's a great scene.
It's the best scene in the movie.
A mediocre movie.
It's a great.
That's like the only scene in the movie.
No. See,
I agree.
Anyway,
guys are shitting all over that.
About Hannibal,
back
that scene.
Back to Brain Dead.
Well, the point is though that and at the time it was annoyed me to that because I invested very heavily in that in Brain Dead, and it was the first image I'd ever had of like having read this idea that they do surgeries that way, but also I looked at and read descriptions and looked at footage of people having their brain stimulated and then suddenly laughing like they'd been told a joke. Or singing a song, or suddenly going, Rover, what are you doing here? Do you know what I mean? Literally, it was called.
So
I'm like, okay, and I described that to those guys, and I was like, okay, so we're gonna, instead of it being the crisis of conscience of a shrink, because in a nutshell, in the original script, the shrink who feels overly responsible, let's just say, for the fate of his patient, finds himself having switched places with his patient, unless he's in a kind of Poe like Dr. Tar and Professor Feather always has been the patient. Who's to say? You know what I mean? It plays that game throughout, but all via a very, as I say, mid-60s, mid-century view of both the mind and social conscience and, things that learn. And so instead it became a kind of a dedicated neurologist trying to identify mental illness in the brain, and particularly searching for the physical site of paranoia and ways to deal with paranoid schizophrenia in the brain, who gets corrupted by in this case, corporate interest, because also that was more of a thing than it was, say, in the mid-'60s to see,
Yes.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
I was very Cronenbergian also, that there's some nefarious corporation lurking, of course.
Well, can I say Eunice, right?
Eunice.
Can I say that, like, it was only when I watched Brain Dead, and then I went, you know, I own, of course, all the CARNOSAUR films, but I watched.
I'm not sure you should own any but the first.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. But when I went back and watched CARNOSAUR again, I realized that you kind of were creating your own little shared universe, because you had Eunice Corporation also be behind the CARNOSAUR stuff.
Right.
So that's pretty cool.
They are. Though sometimes it gets convoluted, because Eunice is very much the corporation behind all of the terrible things that happen ultimately in CARNOSAUR.
Right.
But when we first meet our hero in CARNOSAUR and he's watching TV, he's watching Brain Dead and actually seeing the Eunice logo. So the levels of reality within that lost upon all those who have done too much drugs and watched the movie too many times. Eunice, by the way, and this is why else make films except to be able to do shit like this. Eunice, that was my high school grammar teacher. Miss Eunice McGuire. She was the only teacher that we all really hated. She was a sweet lady, but we hated her. Because you have to remember, I was a kid when I made the movie. I was like, when I started writing it, I was like 25. By the time we made it, it was 27. Wow. But I was still, you know, as you are then, still in my high school mentality. So almost everybody in it, I also got to just say, oh, I'm making a movie, but quietly, I'm going to just fill it with everybody from high school. So all my friends will get to see it and recognize that we're still in high school, even though, of course, we were not.
Yeah.
Right.
So yes, Eunice Corporation, brains, blood, body horror, and brain horror. And Brain Dead. So yes, it's a mini art film within that, in a way, and we got away with casting it in a way that was not typical.
Cast is amazing.
Bud Cort, come on.
I mean, yeah.
Bud Cort.
Bud Cort is a genius in that movie.
We had Bud Cort.
But there's a twisted humor in that movie too. That everybody's in on, and it works really well.
Always keeps you guessing.
Yes, probably to an almost annoying extent, and it's made on the classic, even slightly on the small side, Roger budget. So very short shoot, though it actually had more locations than I mean, typically everything we did at Rogers we shot in that back lot, about 8 blocks from where I'm sitting now, where it used to be in Venice, here in Venice. That one we actually got to shoot in a couple places, that water treatment plant that you see in a lot of bad 90s movies, that passes for the Insane Asylum and a few others. But yeah, Bill Pullman, who was very respected but not a star yet.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a star to me because he had been in all the Sam Shepard plays. He was like created half of them. He'd been in Ruthless People. I don't know what other movies he had really been in at that point. Paxton, a genius, you know. Yeah. But again, mostly supporting parts. He had not had a lead up to that point. Bud Cort, one of my heroes, yes. Of course. To play Halsey, one of my most favorites. Roger's contribution to the casting, which is also one of my favorite things in it, which is George Kennedy.
Yeah.
Old friends. He loved George, and I loved him, and he's great.
Always good.
Yeah.
So good. Oh my God. To be with George Kennedy, I mean, it's like
he's kind of a legend.
Absolutely. You know, think of the egg eating scenes with Paul Newman. The number of eggs that Newman actually ate for that scene with George. And other than those guys, almost everybody in that movie is from the theater group that I was a part of at the time, and a lot of the comic spirit of it, which was Tim Robbins and the Actors Gang. And in fact, Bill came in at the last minute because Tim was supposed to play that part.
Oh, wow.
Really?
He was. And about literally only 2 weeks, I think, probably before shooting, he called me up to tell me that he had been. So like every other actor you've seen there is from this group, the Actors Gang, that I was the writer for, Tim the director, and they were all the actors, and often Tim also. So Lee Ehrenberg, who's in there, who's seen 50 zillion other movies, and Ned Beatty, not Ned Beatty, the late great, Ned Bellamy, a lot of others. Tim got cast that same week in the big budget, much better version of this movie, Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah.
Really
it's interesting because they're similarities.
Yes.
Wow. Interesting.
They are. There are actually little crossovers between the two movies, even.
See.
Because we then were making them fairly simultaneously, and I know that he had shared the script with them, and I had read that script, and there's things we couldn't afford to do that were in my script that they could afford to do and did do, which is great, and I was happy for that. But so yes, even though all the read-throughs and everything we had done up to almost the last minute was Tim doing it with everybody else, and it's fine. We then at almost the last second, the brilliant casting director again, and Roger was appalled that I had a casting director because he never have a casting director. You just call these people up, but again, because of that group, knew as woman Barbara Cohen, who is also unfortunately no longer with us, but if you ever look up her credits, she did such incredible casting, especially for indie movies. And she's the one who then immediately, when Tim had to step out of it, said, Bill Pullman, and pulled folks in like that.
Wow.
And there was a moment I know where Roger was not going to approve that cast because only George made sense to him, in it. But Brad, I think it was probably Brad Cravoy, who was foreign sales for him at the time and also a producer of films scaled at that same time. I said, no. In Europe, they'll know these guys. We can cover the budget in Europe. It'll be fine. And he was right. Wow. Anyway, it's a peculiar movie. And Roger both loved it and hated it. It was saved by the fact that I think he couldn't make heads or tail of it at first. And he showed it, what was really one of the later cuts of it, to Carl Franklin and Cat Shea Rubin, who were probably the directors in the half a generation or quarter generation pre-me, who had just come through and done the best for him and who he trusted the most. And he got them to sit down and watch it and said, should I rearrange this thing? What can I do? And they were like, no, don't touch it. We love it.
Was it well received?
Carl a lot that they did it. What's that?
Was it well received? I mean, did it do pretty good for?
I did. Ultimately, critically, it did great. As Roger used to later say to me, he said, you had the honor of making both the most critically acclaimed film of my later years and the most lucrative. Unfortunately, they were two different movies. That and the other was CARNOSAUR. No, Brain Dead. Here, the last Brain Dead story I'll tell you, which was both shows you everything that was horrible about him and why it was a great start for me, especially in retrospect. My other real hero really was, and a big influence on the movie, was Sam Fuller. I don't know if you guys know, it was a great.
Of course.
Yeah.
And in particular, film he made called Shock Corridor, which was
the best.
Yes.
The best. Right. I mean, an amazing film. If you people out there have never seen it, get it immediately. In fact, if you get it, I think the Criterion disc, it has a film that I did about Sam that's as part of the Criterion disc.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Called The Typewriter, the Rifle, and the Movie Camera. That's great because it's got Tim in it, and it's got Scorsese and Jarmusch and Tarantino, and we're all a little tribute that I did to Sam. Anyway, so yes, Brain Dead got actually very respectable reviews here. Did very well. Got a decent theatrical release. Made some money. Played festivals, out of competition that normally no Corman movies would be shown.
Right.
And in Europe, in particular, to a lot of them. And one day, about 4, 5, 6 months afterwards, Roger called me up in part because he was trying to cajole me to do another movie when I was trying to get out of it, doing another movie for him. And I was working with John Landis to try to make what would have been our Willard movie for a year that we were trying to do. And Roger called me up one day and said, well, hey, you should be really honored, I'm like, yeah, why? He said, well, the Avoriaz, I think it was Avoriaz, or Deauville, not Cannes, but a pretty major French, especially more genre-oriented festival. He said, they loved Brain Dead. They wanted to give it the jury prize.
Wow.
And I said, well, what do you mean they wanted to give it? He's like, oh, well, they couldn't because it wasn't entered. I'm like, what do you mean it wasn't entered? I'm like, well, because they would have had to pay $2,000 for it to actually be entered. So I was deprived. So cut to 10 years later, many years later, post CARNOSAUR. And we'll come back to CARNOSAUR. But when I was in quite a bit, I felt like my career was probably over because CARNOSAUR, the most famous thing about CARNOSAUR at the time was back in the day when people actually had movie critics and movie critics even had TV shows.
Yeah.
When Ebert had a TV show.
Yes.
They spent about half of an episode arguing whether or not CARNOSAUR was the worst film ever made. And to his credit, Gene Siskel couldn't really defend the film, but argued vociferously that it was not the worst film ever made. Roger taking the view that it actually was the worst film ever made. So you can imagine there was a period where I was really, really crappy about life and whether, I should ever even write or direct or do anything ever again or even show my face in public. And I ended up being, in part to probably cheer me up, got asked to do this film about Sam, my hero, Sam Fuller. By working title, and Tim had kind of instigated it, and I shoot this whole thing with Sam, and the last night we're with Sam, and he's not talked much to me in it because I'm behind the camera and directing it, and Tim is Robbins is hosting it, and that's how he came to do it because he had met him, so he's talking to Tim. The last night we're all having dinner together, And by the way, if you've seen Brain Dead, you'll have seen that literally I recreate the corridor from Shock Corridor, minus the dwarfs in the back, right? So the forced perspective of a hallway that they're all walking down.
Nice.
So the very last night at the dinner, we're celebrating that we finished this thing and this and talking about this and whatever. And Sam turns to me and I said, he's probably not said like 20 words to me the whole weekend because the whole film was shot in one weekend. And I'm instead saying things to Tim and then Tim's saying them and he's saying that to Tim. It's like that, you know, it's being done remote control. He out of the blue says, God damn it. I knew it. I did see your movie. In fact, I gave it the prize. And he had a stroke and was about to have another one. So I didn't know what he was talking about.
Okay.
And he's like, no, with the brains. And I'm like, brain dead? He's like, yeah. And he proceeds to tell me the story about how he was the head of a jury at this festival in France. And he had seen that film as one of the films that they were showing. And he had liked it so much, he said he had locked the door of the jury's room and made the rest of the jury watch the movie and wouldn't let them out the door until they agreed to give it their jury prize. He said, and then I heard some son of a bitch wouldn't pay the entry fee.
He really would have had it.
Yes, my hero.
Sam Fuller.
The guy who, when Roger had called 10 years earlier to say, hey, good news, bad news, I wouldn't pay the money if you get a prize. It had been actually him. So it was like this benediction that said, no, don't give up, kid.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And by the way, getting back to Siskel and Ebert, how many times has Roger Ebert recanted on one of his reviews?
That is true.
If he had lived long enough, he might have eventually come around.
Yeah, he did kind of sort of sometimes did, but
And he was wrong about so many films.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead,
he also wrote the script for Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, so there's that.
Well, I do enjoy that, but
yeah.
And you go back, look up. He wrote an infamous piece about Night of the Living Dead the year it came out.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And basically saying Hollywood should be ashamed of itself.
Yes.
And basically saying that
Hollywood
movies come out of Hollywood, not out of other places.
Shame on you, Hollywood.
Sick things will come out like this. He later did repent of that. Okay, but it's not bad enough that on what was actually really kind of network television in an era when people actually watched network television.
Right. They
had really been just talking about how terrible the film was.
Yeah, they had this huge outlet that everybody watched and listened to.
So in addition to that, just to finish with the Siskel and Ebert, do you remember that then Fox had like a primetime animated show called The Critic about
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
which had an episode and in which the critic is trapped on an airplane on its way to a festival and other critics are on there. And Roger and Gene are sitting 2 seats in front of him. And throughout the episode, the running gag is they're still arguing about CARNOSAUR.
Wow.
So I couldn't escape the badness that was.
That's amazing.
Of how bad it was that they were still making jokes about how bad it was. Comedy's about movie critics.
Right. Yes, right.
Okay, look, here's the thing. As you say, there's some sense you would have thought maybe there would be some sense of accomplishment that I did not have. And why do I not have? I'm going to ask you a question. Why did I not have that sense of accomplishment?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Well, I will tell you, sir, exactly why. And I blame Roger. And it took me years to get over it, as I say, because there was an accomplishment there, not least of which that, I mean, the amount of money the movie made was ridiculous. Not that I got any of that, but Roger, literally, as he said, it was the single most lucrative film of his entire career, not just of the last one, of his entire career.
Spawn sequels and spinoffs.
5 of them. I know. Did I get it? But here's the thing. So you would have thought, yes, I feel like, okay, it's not, and it's versus, Jurassic Park. Right?
Jurassic Park.
Right. All that.
For the money that you spent on that movie.
Okay, but that's the point. The money. Let's talk about the money.
Talk about the money.
Let's talk
I will
about
go to
the
my
money.
grave still bittered about with the money.
Go, man, go.
How is it that having escaped his clutches and freely moved on, that Roger enticed me to come back? It was like Godfather 3, right? He enticed me to do that when I had done Brain Dead and then created Body Chemistry, which then I had walked away from, and then was to do the film with Landis that we didn't get to make, and therefore was doomed to write and direct the sequel to my own movie that I didn't make, Body Chemistry 2.
Wow.
My masterpiece.
And they made like scores of other sequels.
Yes.
And
that was also started with, it was a franchise I created from, but then, left because I thought if I could make a real movie, that would be nice. I came back to CARNOSAUR because he said, Adam, come in, let me tell you about it. And he told me a bunch of things, not the least of which was that it was going to be the most expensive movie of his entire career. Now, that didn't mean, I mean, we all knew Jurassic was going to be hundreds of millions, but again, this is early 90s dollars.
Sure.
So it was more serious, he was going to spend, he said, I guarantee you it will be minimum of 5 million. But I think maybe we'll get another 5 million from some other people. You know, I'm suddenly thinking, oh, wow. I mean, this is an era when the budgets we were generally working with were about $500,000, which sounds like, well, $500,000, you should be able to do a lot. But again, this is not making a movie on your phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
35 millimeter with union scale.
Yes.
Effects. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, and when even an average mid-sized movie is, say, 20 or million or whatever it would have been in that period, 20 to 60, say.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, wait a second. He's really serious. He said, and let me tell you what else. My dear friend Diane Ladd, and he literally pulled out this like IOU, like a physical IOU. He said, she has owed me. I have kept this IOU, this debt of honor for 40 years, whatever, from when they did Wild Angels. I think.
Wow.
Jeez.
Right? Her and Bruce Dern and him
Right.
and the gang. And literally it was written out in Diane's hand saying, so basically that was at any point, he could still call on her to do a film and sight unseen, she would have to do it. And this is when she had won an Oscar now.
Yeah.
And she used
Oh.
she's like, Adam, you're going to have
unseen.
$5 to $10 million. You're going to have an Oscar-winning lead actress.
Right.
Sounds good.
And he said, I've got a script, but don't forget the script. Don't throw the script away. And it's based on this novel. Here's the novel. And he said, but don't read the novel. I said, well, of course I want to read the novel. So the story with the... Anyway, okay, we'll come back to the story. I'm going to cut to the end of that, the point of which is I fully vested in it. We wrote a pretty great script that then attracted a lot of other really interesting actors and interesting people to it and all this stuff. And we're maybe, I mean, literally 2 weeks away from shooting, just starting prep. And that was unusual. They didn't get 2 weeks prep.
Right.
And he called me to his office and he said, Adam, I have to tell you, things, you know, a bunch of things have really gone bad. And, you know, it's not the budget that we thought. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, you know, it's the standard. I said, what do you mean it's the standard? It's like, you know, so it went overnight from being, okay, we're not going to get to the 10 million, but it'll be 5 million to being $500,000, which meant immediately going back to the same schedule that basically Braindead was made on. So the movie was made for about $500,000.
Wow.
Okay, fine. I'm too deep. We did it. All my friends are in it again. It's a return to Eunice and everything. And we have a great time making it. And it actually, despite everything, despite me having to be the dinosaur with my hand in a sock half the time.
That was you, huh?
That was my hand looking like Kermit half the time because the giant monsters were so terrible. It's still turned out. And then, look, it's getting all this attention. And oh, look, Connie Chung. He's going to be on Connie Chung on NBC Nightly News or whatever nightly news she was on because it was such a big, audacious deal that he was doing an end run around Jurassic
Park, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the idea of like a down and dirty kind of gory drive-in version of a Jurassic Park movie is a great idea.
It is a great idea. The point of him and Connie Chung is, what does he say to Connie Chung and to everybody in this town who's listening and who's my real audience? Is I'm like, okay, I made Braindead. They thought that was clever. I got some interest, especially as a writer, but no one's let me direct. Here they're going to see this thing I did for $500,000 and it looks pretty good. I'm going to get to do something real here. He says, and Connie, it's the most expensive film I've ever made. I can't be exact, but I spent far more than $5 million on this film.
Oh, no.
Oh.
And he then proceeded to repeat that in all places. So I know it sounds perhaps petty of me now, but you can imagine that
Sure.
still in my 20s, I'm desperately trying to get started. And I've worked my ass off having been baited and switched with this to make this thing,
Right.
yes, down and dirty, but still look okay.
Yeah.
But even I'm thinking, oh, well, okay, if I had $5 million, there's a whole bunch, you would never have seen that sock puppet. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
That would have been actually a sea change in effects. And trust me, the audience, I mean, Connie Chung didn't know what that means. And no, the audience didn't know and they don't care.
Right.
But the internal audience that you're actually at that stage of your life and career making a little movie like that for, they knew and they thought that was true.
Right.
So I'm supposed to run around going, no, he lied. It was this. It was actually this. It was, I don't want to say lied. And anyway.
Now, Adam, really quickly for listeners who aren't really aware, when Universal announced that Steven Spielberg's been signed.
right.
They're going to do this Jurassic Park. This was a big deal. And it was going to take them a while to do it, to deal with big music and how are they going to do these dinosaurs? They're going to spend a lot of money. So Roger knew that if I could capitalize on this whole dinosaur thing, that Universal is going to spend a ton of money on marketing. If I can get a dinosaur film out there before Jurassic Park, maybe I can,
free marketing.
Yes.
It was sheer genius. And the fact is, probably in the end, I mean, it would not have been as good a film as it was, but he could have had Wynorski do it, and it still would have probably made the same amount of money and fulfilled his function. Well, no, it might not have made quite as much. The real genius there is Rogers, and it's exactly what you're describing, Larry. And it was based on very practical things. You have to remember that the image in his mind, and then, yes, the image in my mind when going off, and it was Piranha.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Which he had made in the wake of Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger would often famously say that was a real turning point in his own work, because when he saw Jaws, one of the first things he thought was, shit, I'm kind of in trouble because they're making A-movie versions of my movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? That's when he looked at Jaws, he said, well, that's the Terror Beneath the Sea, but with an extra $40 million. But he had gone ahead and with a very clever script by John Sayles and some excellent direction from Joe Dante, made a terrific,
great
down
movie,
and dirty take apart of that. So that was definitely a sign to me of the kind of what you try to do well in that situation.
Right.
Which is you do, and Roger was very clear with it, and he and I would discuss this, that the key is you do what they can't afford to do. They're going to do what you can't afford to do, which is have great special effects, for example.
Right.
So you do what they can't afford to do. You can be a bit more countercultural. You can be a bit of a downer. You can be funny. You can be socially critical. You can even have an unhappy ending.
That's the thing is, I would say that. Right. I would say
not to give it away.
No, but whatever frustrations it must have been with the budget you had, to me, the script comes first. And that script for a drive-in dinosaur on the loose movie has a lot of things going on in it. You got the food industry, you got the environmental thing, and the pacing is good. It's like the writing is what I enjoy the effects. I mean, I can appreciate it for what it is.
And from the very beginning, Adam, just the whole chicken stuff at the beginning.
Yeah, all that stuff is disturbing.
Part of it is, yes. The credit
it's disturbing.
Chickens.
Yeah.
And I got to give a lot of credit to actually the editor of that film and of my previous film, Rich Gentner, had made, I believe it was an Academy Award nominated short, like in the mid-60s, called Chickens, A Process.
No. Are you serious?
That we actually used that footage of, that he had made when he was a student at San Francisco State. And Rich had gone on to be an assistant editor and then even an editor with Peckinpah in the kind of late period of Peckinpah.
Wow.
And in the late period of Rich's career, as you say, Corman was always people on their way up, working with people on their way down. The beauty of that. But Rich and I really bonded, and he taught me so much, and he wanted to work with me because he was a big Brain Dead fan within that world. And the chicken stuff, that was right from the get-go. I said, when I realized I was going to do it, I planned. And by the way, that's not in, we should talk about, okay, sorry. We're going to back it up to a second. The genius of Roger is, he knew he wanted to do a Piranha with this.
Mm-hmm.
But he knew it long before Spielberg even got it, because he also was friends with Crichton. They would and when the book came out, he didn't wait till they announced the movie.
Yeah.
When Crichton's novel came out, Roger said to himself, that's going to be a movie. It's going to be huge. I'm going to go. And he was sensitive to the fact that people called Piranha a Jaws ripoff. He thought, in his own crazy way, he thought, they're not going to be able to say this is a ripoff because I'm going to find a book too.
Right.
So he was looking for a book then right away, and he happened to find this book by the pseudonymously named Harry Adam Knight. The initials spell hack. That's not an accident, because it's not a real person. It was actually John Brosnan, who you may know as having written a lot of really great movie books in the 70s and 80s on sci-fi cinema and horror cinema.
Wow.
I actually had his James Bond book.
And his James Bond book. That's right. John Brosnan, who was a wonderful, I didn't realize till years later when he almost punched me in a bar in London. Because he came up to me and said, I'm Harry Adam Knight. And I'm like, what? Who is this guy? it was him. It was John Brosnan. But so he bought John's novel.
Oh, okay.
He wrote some other great ones too. The Fungus, about fungus that takes over. That's pretty great. The CARNOSAUR novel is not bad at all, actually. It's quite good. the only thing I took from the novel was that he had already a version of the idea of genetically splicing them in relation to birds, which was a very smart thing, actually.
Because birds are supposedly kind of related
Right.
distantly.
It's actually way more plausible.
Right.
I hate to say it, but Carnosaur is more scientifically plausible than Jurassic Park.
Okay.
You heard it here first, folks.
That's
You
right.
heard it here first.
It is more plausible in every way, except for maybe when Diane Ladd gives birth.
Well, okay.
No, that could happen. That could happen.
I think there's a little stretching there, I think.
But
the idea that you could get a... Yeah, I'm sorry. Go, James.
No, a vegan would be the first to tell you about, all the hormones that chickens are injected with.
Right,
and that's
right.
not too big of a stretch from genetic experimentation. Right?
It's not.
Sure.
And the idea that you could make somehow dinosaurs by their closest genetic relatives, which through research I determined would be chickens. He had it as some exotic bird. I'm like, fuck that. It's chickens.
Right.
Versus, oh, look, we got some in amber and we took a little bit of it. And not only that, but from that little bit, we got every dinosaur that ever walked the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Or whatever it was. We got a computer model. So no, he had bought that novel early on. So he was fully prepared. And actually in that infamous Connie Chung interview, it's great. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. There's a great moment when she says like, so you must have read, Crichton's novel. You knew about Crichton's novel and you thought you would do yours. He's like, no. He said, I read this wonderful novel by Mr. Knight named Carnosaur called Carnosaur. And I read it and I thought this would be a great movie. And it was, of course, as I'm sure you know, written several years before Jurassic Park. And he said, I know Michael. He's an honorable man. I'm quite sure he didn't mean borrow so much from Mr. Knight's novel.
Oh,
that's hilarious.
Amazing.
By that point, he was borrowing from his own work because
That's true.
yet
Westworld
another amusement park that goes wrong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I got my ultimate revenge on that where one of the things I made the most money on that never got made was a remake of Piranha we were going to do for Fox, which was, of course, and the most fun thing about it was that it was all set in the water park. The amusement park that's a water park.
Right.
Sure.
That's hilarious.
That's another separate story we'll not discuss. But Roger was genius about it. His plan was down to a very strict schedule. He then did wait until the movie was announced, and then he did the timing of the film very carefully, because what he wanted was he knew he would get an actual theatrical when he hadn't probably had any theatricals for the last 3 years before that. I think Brain Dead probably had been the last one. He had planned a theatrical for it, had gotten people psyched up for it. And by the way, a worldwide theatrical, which was even rarer for him. Yeah. And he timed that so that would come out while they were making the film. And so that the blockbuster release, when that was an important weekend, the day that your things was going to show up on the shelf at Blockbuster, another institution gone.
Yeah.
Then that would be the opening weekend of Jurassic theatrical. He literally timed it.
It's Dino Fever.
Yeah.
Well, of course, exactly. and all those people who couldn't even get into the sold out screens, and then you're going to, and they're like, hey, and then he knew that way Blockbuster, it would get tons of play at Blockbuster, it would get tons of rental and sales,
right?
Mostly rental in those days, which was real money.
Yeah,
don't exist anymore now with streaming. I mean, people are paying per viewing of it.
Right.
Then he knew he would get another go at it when Jurassic came out on VHS.
Right.
Because
people are going to go to Blockbuster. Smart. Hey, where's that dinosaur film? And
absolutely,
here it is.
Carnosaur. 8 copies, they'd be gone. They'd say, "Oh, looking for Jurassic Park? Try Carnosaur."
Yeah. Movie.
So he literally, but this was all him and his sales guys. I mean, they were genius. There was always, as we know, there is an artist, a true artist in the deepest sense, inside Roger, and there is one of the greatest businessmen that the film industry has ever known, also in there, and making the same joke that he made about the two films that were, the most critically loved and the most financially successful, not the same film. Those were unfortunately two different guys, within him. I think they were always at war, and sometimes in his own work and in the work of ours and others that he did. But I have to say again, yes, Carnosaur owes a lot to the spirit of the John Sayles, Joe Dante movies.
Totally, yeah.
To me, you know.
Oh yeah.
That was certainly conscious, you know, to try to do what those guys did in the 70s, which I remember seeing as a kid in the 70s, and going, oh wait, this is cool. I get it. This isn't, you know, this is small, but look at this. They felt cooler. They felt countercultural. They felt authentic in a different way than, you know, whatever was the equivalent we were getting of the official Hollywood at the time.
Right.
And then Carnosaur wanted to do that.
So although she owed a big favor to Corman, when she was shooting the movie, was Diane Ladd, because she seems to be having fun. She's
gives
so
it her
great in
all.
the movie.
Yes, she does.
How was she to work with?
Enough time has passed.
Yes. She's a genius. She's fantastic. And by the way, we have to stay another second on the genius of Roger Corman. It wasn't just that he was going to play the card that she's in it, but why? Why her in this movie? Gentlemen?
Because her daughter?
Yes.
Hello.
Laura Dern.
If only Laura Dern gave birth to a dinosaur in Jurassic Park, then, you know, it would have been even more memorable.
This is genius. This is really
genius.
That's the level. This is like a 6-dimensional chess.
Yeah, it is. That is genius, though.
You know, until now,
he had decided now is the time to bring that shit. He waited till he knew what the casting was, and that's when they brought me in and all that stuff.
Like Kismet.
She's brilliant. She was fantastic in the sense that she's, you know, she's like having Eric von Stroheim in it or something. Do you know what I mean? She's having Boris Karloff or Bella, better than Bella, because she actually could sort of speak English.
The scenery had bite marks out of it. I mean,
it was pitch perfect for the movie, though. I mean, it was,
and she's playing a mad scientist. On the other hand, she's a very, 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 you know, serious person and very difficult in that context, and not. I mean, I could tell you stories about other actors, or about, well, the best examples would be Pullman and Paxton, who, for different reasons, totally got that this was kind of guerrilla filmmaking.
Right.
And she knew that because she once upon a time had made movies like that.
Sure.
But she hadn't made movies like that in 30 years. So that was not going to be, and okay, down to the fact that she's the only person in any Corman movie in that whole period who actually had a trailer, rather than using these really scuzzy little rooms they had there. They had to bring a trailer into this old junkyard that we used to shoot in. And it wasn't enough that we had to pay out of the budget. And by the way, out of the now not $5 million, but $500,000 to pay for her trailer.
So she had a bigger trailer than Carnosaur.
Well, he's a puppet, so I would hope so.
We had to pay for 2 days of consultation with her feng shui expert.
Oh my God!
No!
Are you kidding me?
No! And her rabbi
for the trailer.
Her rabbi.
Her will was going to be placed, and they had all these different religious things around it. I mean, it was.
Oh my God!
And we would lose a lot of hours and time. You know,
I'm sure.
We're talking about a type of filmmaking where you have to get 80 setups, and you can go a long time, but actually, you know what? It's not like you're shooting an indie Sundance movie. You can't be like, dudes, let's get some pizza and we'll shoot all night. You can't. It's actually sad.
Yeah.
You know, and you will get killed in penalties. And there's other actually union people there. So you also would have a production manager walking around with a 2x4 going, you got to shut this down. You got to end. You got to end. There was real problems there. And in the end, because of issues, let's just say, that we had with some of the final shootings with her and the time it was taking, I didn't get to finish shooting the ending of her character as it was supposed to really, as I originally written it.
Okay.
But so in post, I came up with another idea, which is what you see in the film, which is that she should give herself a cesarean with her fingernails and give birth to that dinosaur. That was not in the script, and she didn't know we had done it because those aren't her hands. Footage of her lying on the ground.
Wait a minute.
And it's all editing, and there's a hand double and a fake stomach, and we're off to the races.
Was that Dick Miller's hand?
Saw that.
I'm pretty sure that was Dick Miller's hand, right?
That was Dick Miller's hand.
No.
Or Sid Haig's.
Sid Haig, right?
Come on. No, I'm sure it was a very capable actress in place. I'm sure.
No, are you kidding? We wouldn't pay for an actress for that. Somebody from the office.
Who's the caterer?
Some homeless lady from.
Hey, you with the hands.
Yeah, it would have been.
You want a sandwich?
Before everyone like shits all over the puppet.
What are we
dinosaur.
shitting all over?
No, because Adam says, "Oh, it's a sock," and
We love it.
Look, I'm just saying. You look at dinosaurs from other films in the past, and your dinosaurs look pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I was John Carl Buchler, right? Who did
details and
the budget you had.
The Velociraptor's not bad. The giant dinosaur itself. So for one thing, he had a suit, and that one infuriated me. But look, I like Buchler. I'm a Goonies fan. I mean, I'm not Goonies, Ghoulies.
Ghoulies.
Right.
Those are good creatures of his, and he made some fun movies.
Yeah.
He was really from the Charlie Band world.
Right.
Which, by the way, there's a whole secret. I mean, those were really financed by Roger. Almost all the band. He was
Charles Band stuff?
He was behind the band stuff.
Really?
No.
He was the silent partner for a huge amount of those.
I did not know that.
I did not know this either. Wow.
Someone I'm sure will discover that and write about it. I remember Roger saying that and saying, "Oh, people aren't supposed to know." But yes, he did. He invested lots in that, probably because he was a bank, for God's sakes. Roger was a bank by that time.
Yeah.
Owned everything he ever made.
Yeah.
And every time he would sell the company, he'd do some amazing trick where he sold them nothing, with the name. And he would still have all those films. He still owns almost all of those.
Wow.
Yeah, look, the Velociraptor, the middle-sized Velociraptor is pretty good. The one that you see attacking,
tears into the
car.
Yeah.
You see take the girl's leg.
Yeah,
that's a disturbing scene.
That's scary.
Adam.
That's really scary.
She's the second assistant editor. She was also not.
Her screams. Her screams when
her screams are great. There you go.
I love the thing with the camera.
Love the idea. I love the idea of them, all the Earth Day people, like chaining themselves to the instruments.
Green brother.
And then they chain themselves and they get slaughtered. That's great.
I mean, for listeners, if you haven't seen this film, there's a sequence where you have they're not really hippies, are they, Sean?
No, they're meant to be like Earth first.
Yeah, right.
Tree huggers.
They're out.
Tree huggers. There you go.
Yeah.
And a Velociraptor comes out. And there's this dude.
It's like a feast for him.
Yes, it is. They're just these happy people. Hey, green lizard.
And they've chained themselves.
Yes.
To the construction.
To the tractor,
Right.
Not knowing that basically they've made themselves into the all you can eat smorgasbord.
Right.
So these and when these dinosaurs eat, they eat. And here's the other thing, Adam, I want to tell you. In Jurassic Park, we're teased some of the eating. You show eating.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's down and dirty driving.
Munching.
That's the whole thing. That goes back to what I was saying. This was the thing that one of the lessons I most got from Roger, and that's the most fun to me. That's true in all the films I did for him, for sure. And in some ways, I've tried to do them in other things that, things like Bones, or even in its own way, things like Salem, that were made necessarily not in the most mainstream ways, that don't do the things you can't do as well as them. Right. No one. They're gonna. The audience. The mantra always is the audience is paying more or less the same to see your lower budgeted thing than the artist.
Yeah.
Right.
So what they don't want to see is just a not quite as good or cheesier version of that. You have to find a way to instead give them something that's of real value that they can't get from the other thing.
Right.
And in this case, it was very clear to me, as it was with Brain Dead 2, that, Roger always knew in some ways it was a bit of sex. His films were sexier than mainstream was. It was a rebel attitude before anybody else, as you guys know, there'd be no Easy Rider if it wasn't for the Corman movies that preceded it.
Right.
He established the idea of a youth audience, and a youth audience even that was ready not just for beach blanket bingo type movies, but for something that fit the culture they were feeling. But gore, going back to Herschel Gordon Lewis and the horror films of the 50s and 60s, was the main thing that mainstream Hollywood couldn't give you, especially before the studios and the MPA came along and basically created this this PG-13 rating, where suddenly they decided, okay, we are going to put in a shocking amount of gore that they would never have allowed, so that in a Batman movie, you can slam a guy's head onto a pencil,
Right.
But as early as as recently as when we were doing something like CARNOSAUR and they're doing Jurassic, no, you can't show much in Jurassic. So when she gets her leg pulled off, it's a little bit like, okay, it's a quick Lucio Fulci shot. You know,
Right.
The gore, I would say that the gore in that movie is really successful. It's ferocious.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's visceral, and I love it. I think I think that really works, and then that helps the dinosaurs become more real.
Yeah.
Right. It's convincing.
Yeah.
The other strategy with that was, and again, I was in some ways, because I knew it was going to be kind of my throwback to Brain Dead, which was also kind of my Cronenberg thing, and my, not just Cronenberg, but a certain late 60s, early 70s thing that you see equally in fact, Romero's was the Romero from The Crazies. Have you seen The Crazies?
Oh yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But those sort of the contagion element in those late early Cronenberg, meaning just before he becomes respectable, right? So
right, exactly. Yeah.
Rabid,
Shivers.
Yeah.
They came from within.
Exactly. And they came from within. And so those and a bit of Crazies. So I was like, oh, rather than do, like when you watch, say, the bad dinosaur movies of the 50s, or even the good ones in there, or even frankly, and I know I'm going to get a lot of shit from you guys for this because I love Godzilla toys more than I love Godzilla movies.
Okay.
Even most of the Godzilla
Fair enough.
movies, where you're going to get your 3 or 4 big monster scenes, but in between that, you're going to get a bunch of the most ludicrous dialogue scenes ever scripted by man. Right?
Yeah.
Get the little people, they will save us. You know, you'll have a scientific discussion, you know, and the general will be saying to the senator, and even.
But they sing, Adam. They sing.
You could have a song that would help.
Are you dead inside?
It's a different vibe, but it's a different vibe. It's a different universe, those movies.
Yeah.
Okay, so forget those ones. Instead, think about even movies that I grew up loving, like Them, or
Yeah.
the ones that were all shot in the desert here. The Sunday afternoon, right? Whatever that guy's name was, it's a giant ant. No, it's a giant, those ones. But again, you know what I'm saying? That in between your 3 scenes where you'd actually see the damn thing, you got those. And I was determined in this case, how am I going to get around that? How do I make that fun? Because frankly, even, you know, well, certainly in Brosnan's novel, that's not true. And I would argue even the Crichton's one, so many of those scenes are going to be pseudoscientific gobbledygook.
Yes.
Right.
And I had the thought, thinking of those Cronenberg Contagion movies and of all that, and of Rabid in particular, if in effect, at the same time that this is happening, I have some kind of contagion thing happening.
Yeah,
some kind of government cover up of the contagion thing happening.
Yeah, you've got
that stuff is cheap. I know I can shoot that for nothing.
Right.
Yes.
And yet it's actual suspense, and it's interesting, and the audience is going to be going, wait, what does this have to do with the dinosaur?
Right.
They seem to be unrelated. I don't want to give anything away until
but it's
together.
The way you have the people have with the fever, and then once the folks in the hazmat suits show up, it's got that crazies element to it, which is very dark and very effective. You know,
and it ties up. Everything comes together.
Yeah. It also makes it more relatable because the tainted eggs, that's something that can happen in our lives. The chances that we're going to go to a dinosaur theme park are pretty low.
What could go wrong? What could go wrong? You know, if you've ever been to a chicken processing plant, and please, I really don't recommend it.
What you showed freaked me out enough.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm good.
I'm going back to beef right now.
Yeah, the closest I've come to is KFC. So
free range. Go free range. Yeah, nuggets. You don't want to see where the nuggets came from.
No, hell no. Hell no.
You know, it's so funny how we're talking about how birds or chickens may be descendants from dinosaurs. So in a way, it's like Kentucky Fried Dinosaur, you know?
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing. I'd like to think that if more of them had survived, we still would have found a way to cook them and kill them and eat them. You know?
Oh, yeah.
True. Yeah, true.
That's good meat.
That's good Triceratops.
Yeah. Not a lot of meat on the T-Rex hands, but
no, but that Bronto bird, boy.
But that would be like the chicken feet that people
chicken feet, right? Yeah, you pickle them.
It would have been like that, and the cracklings, you know, from the skin, that would have been good. And grass-fed brontosaurus.
Oh man, I'm hungry. Wow. I want those ribs that knocked my car over.
Exactly. forget it. Who wants the? I don't want my Jetsons future. I want my Flintstones past.
There you go.
And I'm curious. When you did the shoot, it was more days than a Corman film usually gets, and you use the dinosaur. There's like a big dinosaur that you use. I think it's like 20 feet. What 16?
Is that thing still around? Does that exist?
It should be sitting in front. It should be it should be an attraction at some kind of a diner, like on Route.
Yes.
Yeah, really.
Really? Right? It should be. I wonder where it is. So here's what he built. Again, I hate to be a broken record, but my $5 million has turned into $500,000.
Yes.
I'm going to pay for her trailers out of that, and fully, more than a third of that whole budget is going to be handed over just as a blank check to Buechler and those guys.
Of course, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I get it. It's effects. Okay,
it's a
he's
big
not ready,
dinosaur. It's
still.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's showing me the drawings of what he's going to do. And he's like, we're going to get the mid-sized kind of almost Rinaldi style puppeted Velociraptor. We're going to have a full-sized, fully mechanical, full-size, life-size T-Rex.
A life-size T-Rex.
And then he kind of says, and it will have a suit. I'm like, what is that? Well, there'll be a suit, but don't worry. We're never going to use the suit. It's just going to be a backup, like the rubber suit, right?
Right.
And I'm like,
Like
no.
Dino De Laurentiis King Kong, like that, right?
And
they made a giant Kong, and then there's
right.
Was the next question your measurements?
Wait, so the giant one.
Yes.
Yeah, it looked pretty cool if you were just taking a photo of it, but it couldn't really move.
It didn't move?
Do anything.
Well,
It moved. It was actually on like a wooden platform that had some wheels and it had guys actually moving it. About like that.
But
his little claws
on Zoom. Yeah, I'm moving my hands.
There was enough creative editing and photography that it worked.
Kind of do
yes,
that.
I agree with you, Sean.
Yeah.
It's
Well, that's because then we broke it up with a lot of other things.
Right.
And was also going to do, look, one of the other great geniuses that came out of the Corman school was Cameron.
Yes.
And I had spent a bunch of time right before then or right around while I was prepping that, actually working for him on writing a Mars miniseries that never got made, which would have been
wow.
And Paxson had also connected he and I up because, as you know, Paxson came out of that world. Obviously, it's why his, everybody knows his character is called Hudson in Aliens.
Right.
Yes.
Because his job on Jim's Corman art department crew was the guy with the Hudson sprayer. That's how those guys knew each other, not because of Billy acting. I mean, for fun, he then gave him that first great little mini part he has at the beginning of Terminator, where he's one of the guys.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That was because he had just been on his crew, on his art crew.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Like How Beyond the Stars. And right. Wow.
So, of course, the movie in my mind was always going to culminate in a faux version of the Aliens climax, but with the little Bobcat substituting for
Ripley's loader,
Ripley's loader, exactly, and going to do battle, and that was in part because I'd been told it was going to be like a literal life-size thing, so we're going to be able to literally shoot this thing wrestling somewhat.
Right.
Yeah.
That was not. we did shoot that, but that's. Yeah. They did.
With editing, but though, once again, with the editing, I think you did a really good job of pulling that off.
Well, I give Gretch Gentner, the editor, did a great job, and Alan Lasky, who's a talented guy from a zillion perspectives, he did a second unit stuff with me, and just so we could get enough coverage for things like the Velociraptor attack, especially in a car, and where you would see what was in there. The goal had been, again, don't do badly what they can do well. So especially in those days, one digital shot would have taken our whole budget. So we're not going to do any digital. So,
it's funny, Adam. One of our previous guests for our Monster Maker show, Ted Haynes, actually, this was one of the second films he worked on, and he didn't work on the main part. He worked on the secondary part. He said he did a lot of repairs to the dinosaurs because they got beat up a lot and
Right.
really needed to be
Right.
touched up every freaking day.
Oh,
So
I'm
that's
sure.
one of the
You know,
things
they're
that he
talking about
did.
actually, he did that in Buechler's Crew for
Yes.
CARNOSAUR.
Yes.
That's great to know, because we did, and I know he was often upset because we were definitely abusing those things to try to get some life.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of the people making them move were, I mean, look, those guys were, you know, some of them were super, super talented, no doubt. And we're trying to do like forced perspective. I mean, the real lessons was, you know, I got from Cameron back in the day, that was in the laser disc era.
I remember it well.
Laser discs, especially I forget what they call them. There were two kinds. There was one kind.
Video disc.
Yeah, but there was one kind where like the whole movie's on one disc, and there's another where it would take like 4 discs or 3 discs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because every frame was fully on there in a way that you could go literally frame by frame.
Right.
So it's great for looking at effect stuff. And I could go through particularly the Abyss, the one for the Abyss, also for Aliens, but particularly for the Abyss, to see, because Cameron's a huge one for, obviously he's a master of the digital, but he only used it in the most focused ways. And when he ever could do something physically or with forced perspective, he was always doing it.
Right.
So, and it was, I think actually it was even maybe Cameron himself who said to me, you got to go back and watch Darby O'Gill and the Little People. Have you ever seen that movie?
It's a long time ago.
You know, you can watch this thing, and the effects are really unbelievable. And it's hard to actually, you have to tell yourself when you watch them, that's every single thing you see in there is being done almost entirely, like 90% with these forced perspectives.
Wow.
This complicated optics where literally it's all physically there, but one's up here, close to your nose, and the other's way back there, and it's a wide angle lens, and they're making big things look tiny, you know, and
Bava.
they're making sets.
Yeah, Bava did that a lot too.
Danger Diabolic.
Yeah,
oh God, Bava was a
absolutely.
master of that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
the lost art. So we tried to do something. That was the goal, and some of it still works. But yes, you keep
Yeah,
moving.
it's you know, it like I said,
We applaud you.
Yes, we do.
We love the movie.
it rises
do.
above
Yes,
its
indeed.
budget and whatever constraints, and you know, it's just a very enjoyable.
It's a really good time.
You know,
Lot of fun.
1993 was a very special year. That was the year I got married and the year Carnosaur and Jurassic Park came out. You know, it's funny.
I'm leaving that alone.
The DJ guys at our wedding, they had asked my fiance at the time and I, it's like, so what music would you like to hear when we introduce you? And I said, oh, the dinosaur movie, dude, the dinosaur movie. And so I thought they were going to play the music from Carnosaur, but no, they instead played the Jurassic Park movie when we came out. I'm all, oh, this isn't Carnosaur music. But, hey, you know, what are you going to do? You know.
So Adam, obviously the film did pretty good. Were you ever asked about doing any of the sequels and being involved in any of the sequels?
Oh, you know, Roger knew it was no. I mean, particularly given already what we'd look. I have to say, I was honestly, there was a period where, you know, now it would be more like, I have a different view of these things to some extent also now. I was still young and hopeful of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It was only maybe
You get over that.
I think I'm trying to think when it was probably not until maybe Haunting in Connecticut came out that my father, of blessed memory, in consoling me for the truly terrible reviews that movie got, even though I thought it was pretty good and people really loved the script, he said, well, that's okay, kid. You know, I was not a kid at that point. That time I was finally, you know, in my 30s. He said, so the people who got paid to see it didn't like it, but the people who paid to see it liked it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't these days, of course, that's not as much true because the critics are often it's Rotten Tomatoes, so it's not actually those critics. But so I probably took that too seriously back in the day, also because of being of a generation that had grown up reading Ebert or reading Pauline Kael.
Sure.
Oh,
Criticism. So the fact that these films were treated so poorly and that I didn't feel like, I mean, Brain Dead people recognized kind of what was there, and Carnosaur didn't get that kind of love in the moment. I mean, it did from the good people at Fangoria and the good people within the genre press, right?
Right.
It didn't outside that. And I will honestly say it closed off really, for me, it literally closed off direction as a path unless I was going to keep doing low budget horror movies. As a writer, I could move, I was already moving into doing either script doctoring or writing originals at that whole other scale. But and I thought that was the whole reason I was going back to Roger. It's like, oh, well, if I direct a $5 million movie, then they're going to let me direct that script that I've written or that I've rewritten for them.
Right.
But when it came out and didn't get that kind of love and was viewed so low budget, it was like, no, you were going to kind of be a joke. Do you know what I mean? To get to do that. And this goes back to the thing I mentioned at the beginning of like, so why haven't in this generation the equivalents of the Scorseses, the Sales, the Dantes, the Camerons, the Coppolas? We forgot Francis.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
True.
Sure.
Why didn't they come out of Corman if he was still working? And what did they come out of instead? And particularly in that turning point of the late 80s and through the 90s, at least in retrospect, and because I think literally maybe me, Carl Franklin, Cat Shea, it's hard to even think of anybody who directed. Rodman Flender made a couple of fantastic movies and has gone on to a good TV directing career. There's a couple other people who made some good stuff then, Louis Morneau. But we didn't produce the Tarantinos, the Soderberghs, the people who really have come in good, great, wonderful ways to define, or the Finchers. We're talking about guys who are all around the same age,
Right.
Where did those guys come from? So they either came in effect from what let's call Sundance, or from, as Fincher did, that world of a certain kind of music video and commercials.
Right. Music videos. Yes. Yeah.
Which neither of those existed before that. So the natural place that the system found its young up-and-comers, or where you went to prove that you could do this, was with the B movies, and particularly with Rogers. And Rogers for good reasons, because he was very strict about how they were made. So that literally, if you're the guy running production at one of the studios and you go, this kid did, this Coppola kid, he kind of did okay with that, and they only had this, and he had this many days. If we give him this amount, he's not going to screw up.
It's just like army training, right?
That's right. That was how it was viewed. It was either that, or you had to come up through, like the Don Siegels and folks of the world like that did, generally out of their own editorial or directing within the studio. But suddenly, when you had truly independent films made often for less than Rogers or for the same as Rogers, but say made over a year on weekends rather than in 8 days in a garage, in Venice.
Right.
Or you had, so on the one hand, you had low budget things made with true creative freedom and an audience that wanted to see that, and an executive audience that I think respected. And again, they were wanting to appeal to a younger audience and thought, so it should be Kevin Smith or it should be that. And those were, I remember, making the Sam Fuller movies, Tarantino was one of the big participants in it. And him talking about, he was somebody else who helped me cure myself of my Carnosaur blues, because he brought with him to the shoot his VHS copy of Brain Dead, which he had kept with him from the video store he used to work at, because it was
Nice.
And he then proceeded to tell me about how much he wanted to do Reservoir Dogs for Roger, and I'm like, thank God you didn't. You were so lucky in a way that you didn't, because I know you would have done what any of us would have done, because we love that kind of thing. But you would have had to actually make Roger's version of that movie, and it would not have been your movie.
Right.
True.
So either you had people who could make a Reservoir Dogs, or like Soderbergh, who could make a Sex Lies.
Right.
Brilliant. And you could go on, and you guys could fill in the other
Sure.
like that. Or you could be a Fincher, and fine, you only had $1 million to make 1 minute, or you had $3 million to make 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Tony Scott, all those guys too.
Yeah.
Well, that whole Putnam school of guys, they were the ones who opened their eyes to that, and then younger folks can do that. And those are all great directors, and it's not a coincidence. I mean, and it's totally well deserved. I'm not saying somehow that was
just
like
a different path. Yeah.
Yes, and one that in my case, I don't know that it would have. I think the kind of director I would have become is not a director that existed in this world then anyway. And in a way, I get much closer to that now, being able to, in effect, be a showrunner on a long form television instead, because it's much closer to the kind of more classical Hollywood, and the relation to the script in relation to the actors, but also in relation to the storytelling. It's much less emphasis on the look. I mean, the look is important, but it's not the way that it is like in a tentpole movie, or the way in which the legacy of those have left it as. So it's a massive sea change. So yes, kids, if you're listening and you aspire to make films, don't necessarily go make, Corman, he probably still will hire you. Go ahead.
Well,
make a little more movie.
you've worked on a lot of genre related things, and I would think that there was a sort of a change in the zeitgeist, that now horror, which was this red-haired stepchild, is now cool and hip, and and you've got your Ari Asters, and now we're in a place where also a lot of different platforms and channels need content, and people love this stuff. And so it always infuriated me that horror was looked down upon, and now it's finally, at least more than it has in the past, come into its own and is a little more respected. I mean, I would love to see about 5 more horror films in the Best Picture category, because I think in the past few years, some of the best movies that have come out have been horror movies.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you just to take Ari Aster and Jordan Peele,
right?
Those guys each made 2 movies in a row that are just amongst the best things I'd seen ever. I mean, and I truly hold Hereditary to be not only one of, certainly to my mind, probably the greatest horror movie of the last quarter century, but one of the best films. I mean, it's
right, exactly. A good movie, period. Right.
Yeah, right. And I feel that way about Midsommar, and I felt that way about both Peele's movies also, actually, particularly the second one. I mean, I thought that was
Us.
Us.
Yeah.
Not them.
Yeah.
Us, which I thought was artistically even beyond Get Out, which I thought Get Out was brilliant. And then not just there, you're absolutely right, Matt, that horror is part of it. All of genre is now the mainstream. And I hugely applaud that. And I'm happy that I've lived long enough into middle age to appreciate that. And as a viewer, I appreciate that. And as a creator, yes. And television, it's even become true in television, which was sort of the last. There was always genre TV, but even that was at a kind of almost lower category than the other. I think for this generation that's growing up now, no, they don't see that hierarchy of value in relation to the genres at all.
Yeah,
the very thought that comic book films could have the elevation that they do. I mean,
I know.
Right?
Yeah. Generation who's taken more seriously than Christopher Nolan, who's done nothing but genre movies. I mean,
we call it the golden age.
Right. I think in many ways it is, and that's great. The price, if there's a dark side to that coin, and I'm not saying necessarily that it is that it's hard to imagine. Well, we'll see. We're going to find out that, well, it's hard for horror to really keep its edge when it goes into the mainstream.
That's true.
That's true.
To
surprise you.
Peele and Aster kept it because Peele did it politically and socially, and Aster did it psychologically and aesthetically.
Yeah, right.
They're paying a price for it in the sense that, I mean, really, of course, that Aster, both, they all kinds of nominations and things that they could have, and Peele got it because that was more allowable in a way, even.
Yes, right.
So there's that side of it. But the other side is at the same time that one of the reasons genres moved to the center, obviously because comic books, but also because tentpole movies became the bread and butter rather than the little extras. But it's also now because of the streaming phenomenon where it's, as somebody has already said 50 times, it's not broadcasting, it's narrowcasting. It's about knowing that you've got a dependable slice that doesn't have to be what they used to call 4-quadrant, audience. You don't, not only do you not have to, it's probably a mistake to even aspire to get everybody to see it. But instead, you can make what you already think people will want because the algorithm has already explained it to you and showed you that it associates these particular ones together. And the downside of that, not only is, I think, a loss of kind of surprise, but I wonder if we'll be able to create the type of genre pieces that have become permanently part of our mythology, whether that's at the turn of the 19th century with Dracula, everything from Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde and The Mummy to Sherlock Holmes that are all kind of written in a 10-year period, to, for that matter, the 20th century versions up to and including, say, Star Wars and Star Trek and the Marvel universe and things like that. They were all still predicated on aiming wide enough that they became permanent fixtures in a way. And you know what I mean? And I don't know that you can. Well, we'll see. I mean, I'd throw it back to you guys. Has anything been created now in the streaming era that will itself be able to create that kind of continuing,
like a new thing completely, in a way.
right? In the same way that all the things that can come from Star Wars, down to and including that you can make a Mandalorian show, and of course
Right.
it's better than anything else that's on streaming. But is there something created from streaming that will itself create that
Yeah,
many
like
spin-offs?
what's the next giant franchise, but completely from new, from fresh.
Can it actually create a franchise? I'm not. That
Yeah.
is already one based on basically 20th century or earlier scaled mythology.
Well, I mean, I have my problems with this show. I was a fan of the comic book series, but The Walking Dead, I think, is pretty close. I mean, I've given up the show. It's lost me, but it's still going. And then you've got Fear of the Walking Dead. That's still going.
And there's another one, I think, going to be now. I think there's
Is
another
that right?
I thought I heard there's another spinoff, maybe.
But and then also the whole zombie and apocalyptic shows.
Yeah, apocalyptic zombie, true. But that some of that is still just before that, because it's
I mean,
feed off of the remakes of Dawn of the Dead and all the zombie apocalypse stuff.
It's got staying power, though. I mean, I never thought that I never thought that this zombie wave would last as long as it has. And there are some good, movies that I think just when I'm like, okay, I'm done with the zombie thing, I don't want to see any more zombie films. And then I see a film like Cargo, Martin Freeman, and there's
Train to Busan.
Train to Busan is one of the greatest movies, certainly one of the greatest zombie films.
Yeah, we're still not done. We're still not done with the undead, that version of the undead. It's an interesting question of why that, of all the potential kind of archetypes and monsters, dominated this last turn of the century, and in the way that nothing has since. I mean, the vampire has had its brief resurgences periodically.
Yes.
Right.
I don't think you're right. You're absolutely right, Matt. All I'd say about that in relation, that Walking Dead was I would argue, was the very well crafted and on every level beneficiary of that wave, not the creator of that.
Oh, absolutely not. But it's the one that had that lasting power as a franchise.
And it gives some pedigree.
Yeah. And because of it, and because of its popularity, there have been these offshoots of the zombie genre, which I think are really good. And just when I'm about to give up on the whole thing, I'll see one and go, wow, that was really different. That was unusual.
Well, then let me ask you, monster experts, because I think we could all probably riff on the meaning of various monsters. Take a stab at why that monster has spoken and still speaks to our time in a way that it's hard pressed to find another monster to do. It's not even clear that you can do another vampire. You can bring Godzilla back. You can bring King Kong back. You can try to have a Frankenstein. They don't necessarily have the resonance that they clearly have had at various times in the past, but the zombie does. Why?
Well, I would actually bring this opportunity up to quote your documentary that you did for IFC.
Yes.
The American Nightmare, where George Romero comes out. Documentary, where George Romero comes out and says, well, the zombies, they're us. And I think right now, without being too glib or pretentious about it, I'd say that, well, we're living in a time where you've got so much information coming at you, you've got so many streaming outlets, and you've got so much. I don't know if we're ever going to see another zeitgeist necessarily, because we've got so many choices.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And as far as, I don't want to be glib. I don't want to sound like some pretentious, grad school idiot.
Oh, it's okay. This is a safe space for pretension.
For once, he doesn't want to be pretentious.
About monsters, for God's sakes, of course.
For once, you don't want to talk about interiors, but go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
This is my disclaimer, see?
Okay.
No, it's like there is a certain sense, I think, of a general societal alienation, and the zombies feed right into that, so to speak, okay? Because you're talking about feeling kind of alienated and alone within the masses, and that's kind of what the zombie movie speaks to, right?
Kind of like the decay of society too, I think, just the breakdown of norms in society, I think.
Yeah, I think the apocalyptic genre as a wider umbrella really speaks to our time, because in a lot of ways, for whatever reasons an individual might have, sometimes it feels that way.
Yes, and I grew up in a very apocalyptic period where you were still expecting nuclear annihilation at any moment.
Right.
I was scared of zombies because of Night of the Living Dead, but I didn't associate them in particular with the apocalypse. That was not the apocalypse I was expecting. I was expecting nuclear annihilation and survival in nuclear winter, or a Crichton style, Cronenberg style pandemic version that we this year.
Train to Busan.
There to be zombies in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
But now my kids can't. If you say the word apocalypse, their brain is thinking zombies.
Zombies, right? But that's why that's why I really enjoy the viral zombies in Train to Busan, because now you're hitting us right where we live and what we're experiencing. When I look at those scenes in Train to Busan where these viral zombies are just crawling over each other in this massive flesh and people, it is so scary. And that's one of my fears too, is crowds. And that's why I'm also a little bit wary
about Comic-Con.
I was just talking about Comic-Con.
Really.
But like
a zombie outbreak at Comic-Con.
Well, there you go.
I'd watch that.
Yeah.
Who would know?
True.
I know. Everyone would think it's cosplay.
Yeah,
everyone would think it's cosplay, which would be great for the first, 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh my God, they're really committing.
Yeah.
But it's also like, especially now, and this is post the zombie zeitgeist, where you've got a lot of political division, particularly in this country, where you could be talking to a family member at Thanksgiving dinner, and suddenly you're on different sides, and it's like, who are you?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of terror you get from a zombie movie. This is my brother.
The other.
Trying to,
He's changed.
They're not who they were before. Yeah.
Right.
I will jump in where James, opened up the way in pretension and thank him for it, and for name checking American Nightmare, which I will say, and I'll say it to your audience, I've done a fair amount of things, known and unknown, and credited and uncredited, and lots of things that I'm proud of and that I've enjoyed. But far and away, the best thing I ever did that felt the most to me, and that I feel like if the rest of it all gets, as it probably most stuff does anyway, washed away, would be of some enduring value, actually is that little movie, The American Nightmare.
It's a great documentary.
I have to say that, you highlight all the heavy hitters that we all love, the iconic filmmakers, Romero, Carpenter, Cronenberg, Hooper, Landis, Craven. I've seen dozens and dozens of interviews and things with those guys, but you get them in a very informal and very philosophical
very thoughtful.
Which, that I've never seen before. Like, that must have been pretty amazing.
That was some of the guys, especially Cronenberg and Craven and Carpenter, those three. Romero from the get-go was like, I'm in. I'm going to talk about it. We're gonna do it. And Savini, who's really important in that.
Oh yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And Toby from the get-go was like, yeah, come if you'll come down to Texas, yeah, great. But those two other guys did not want to do it. They'd all, for different reasons. Cronenberg, he had moved past all that. He didn't want to talk about those films. He didn't.
Sure. Yeah.
He was, that same year, I think he was, the head juror at the jury at Cannes. He had fully made the transition to being an artist, rather than a horror guy, right? So he didn't necessarily want to talk about that. And Craven also, in his case, it was less that he had transcended horror, because he was still mostly purveying horror. But I think there was an element of the sheer ugliness of Last House on the Left and the circumstances under which it was made that he was not sure he wanted to revisit. And I owe the fact that those guys did it entirely, because my intention was exactly what you're saying, Sean. We're not going to come there to do the Cinefex interview. You're not going to be like, oh, hey, how'd you make that head blow up?
Right.
Talk about it. Miller. Do you know what I mean? Because the whole idea, partly because this was in 99, 2000, when I felt that I was saying goodbye to the whole genre. I was sort of done with it. And I wanted to understand why I had devoted so much of my life up to that point to it. And I'd zeroed in. I'd originally been asked by the IFC to try to do a larger history of the whole horror film. I said, great, if you give me 10 episodes, I will. But in one episode of even, an hour and a half or whatever you're going to let me, I can't. And we got the idea, Jonathan Saring, I proposed, I said, I'd like to look at the period of my own childhood, basically. The years that I went from being basically 6 to 16, so 68 to 78. And he said, and he said the phrase, oh, you mean The American Nightmare? And I was not that familiar with that phrase. I said, what do you mean? Because he, as a kid, had been at Toronto. They'd done a famous series at the Toronto Festival in maybe 1980, I think, or something, called The American Nightmare, that for the first time showed a number of those films in a serious way, that Robin Wood, a great critic.
Wow.
I said, yes, and we'll call it that. So the intention had always been to do something different. That was both for me a chance to ask the question of what did horror mean to me and why was it? But also to answer questions I still couldn't really answer for myself at that time, like why horror? What pleasure do we get? What is this fundamental question of what pleasure and use is something that's so purposefully unpleasant and difficult and all of those things, and to look at kind of the social side of it, where
social and political, less pop culture, more deeper kind of which is great.
I mean, that was the intent, and Landis called Carpenter and said, no, relax, you do want to talk to this guy. And he also knew Wes well and called Wes, and so each of those guys said, okay, fine, we'll give you half an hour, and they became really long ones. But Cronenberg was still continuing to say, I don't want to do it. And then Scorsese, who was really wonderful in the film that I did about Sam Fuller and really loved that film, he called Cronenberg and said, you should sit down with this guy. It's not going to be the conversation you're expecting.
Nice.
Great.
That's amazing.
And I owe it hugely to him. And that was true. And in fact, that conversation that we then filmed was so big and expansive and so juicy. In fact, I'll send you guys, you'll appreciate that, because that film was also co-done by the British, on the British side, by the BBC and the British Film Institute. And the professor involved with that, who was also on the producers column, he does a journal, comes out of, I don't know, Cambridge University, one of these called Critical Review. They published the whole conversation.
Really?
Oh, wow.
We only got to use the section on those two movies, whereas we went from kind of cradle to the moment in that. It was just great.
Wow.
So no, I appreciate that, and it was fascinating and strange to me because also, you guys remember this. So I'm making that movie in '99 and 2000. It premieres initially in the fall of 2000. It has its festival premiere at Toronto, and is in Berlin, and has the things that it has like that. And I don't say this is causal at all. It's to do with zeitgeist. I think one of you was using that phrase. None of those films had been remade in that period.
Right.
Yes.
Not for a long time.
Yeah.
All of them were.
We didn't get the shitty remakes of like The Fog and stuff like that yet.
No, it's coming. It's coming. All of them were remade like 4 years after that.
Yeah.
Within those next 3-4 years. I mean, almost every single one of them.
Except for They Came From Within.
No one's going to touch that.
Because it's perfect.
That movie is so good. But, they did, because what's his name? The James Gunn kind of did remake that.
You mean the remake of, like the Dawn of the Dead remake kind of?
No, James Gunn.
Slither.
My God, It's got the little thing. It's floating in the back.
A little more comical.
But without the sex element, though.
Because it's
without Barbara Steele.
Sex in the 20th century, then.
But see, and that's another reason why I love your documentary so much, because those films and that time period that you chose, it's almost like punk rock. Those were those films are so raw.
Yeah.
In their talent and their execution. Mm-hmm. And that's what made them so scary. I saw They Came From Within with my mom.
Oh my God.
And this is what happened too, because it was one of those things where I'm always trying to get her to take me to a horror film. And, I'm too young. I got to have an adult. And so it was on a double feature. And it was like the first feature was Food of the Gods, something that's like fine, right? Like, okay, here's the next one. We don't know anything about the next movie. And it's that. And every once in a while, I just, I see my mom looking over at me like, are you okay? Like this? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Lynn Lowry.
I just want to say for listeners, if you haven't seen this documentary, I'd highly recommend it. It's probably not what you think. It's a terrific documentary with these great filmmakers, and what you do with the filmmaker and their film and showing society, reflecting the times with Vietnam and civil rights, and my God, I mean, the funny thing is when I was watching it gave me chills. And I never really thought about some of the stuff that was brought up.
No,
but it's just
it does feel strangely almost more relevant now.
Yes.
Which also shows you the timelessness of those movies too.
Yes, and not since I was a kid on the south side of Chicago in the late 60s and early 70s have I seen urban chaos, riots, crazy people trying to get into the Capitol. I mean, from every side, and politically from every side in a way,
Right.
much as we did in that moment, as is very much reflecting that. So, I mean, my God, if nothing else, I guess we can look forward to even more good horror movies now.
Exactly.
Well, don't jinx it.
You can. I don't know. It's probably streaming elsewhere, but also somebody has posted, not me, but I'm happy to see that several people have it on YouTube just sitting there. So you can watch it. It is worth seeing.
It's so good.
That it brought to mind from what we were talking about why, because I mean, we could go on about the zombies and about what happened to George's zombies versus these zombies, because it's not, and George would be the first to say what happened between the white zombies, the Lugosi zombies.
Right.
Yes.
The classical.
Because he grew up with the voodoo ones, and he said, "No, I don't need any of that."
Yeah.
And he made a new image out of it. Right.
Oh, I know.
Very different. And that got taken up, and I'm okay. I'm not a purist in that way. I think the fast running. I mean, he anticipated some of that in Dawn, but the things that then it spawned. But I do remember seeing George not long before he passed and talking with him, as I'm sure others had, about his zombies versus the ones now. And his big point, which I thought was kind of beautiful, was especially in the first one, but even in Dawn also, your heroes were sort of, especially in the first one, they were not the guys with the guns shooting the zombies. They were the guys trapped between the zombies and the guys with the guns shooting them.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And he said, it's not that the zombies are okay. It's not that we're saying, oh, they're just as bad as it. It's not about that. But he had never fallen into the us versus them thing of where it's just about, kill all your neighbors because your neighbors are now zombies. It was about the nightmarishness of a world in which both those things were happening. And particularly you feel that in the first one because of the racial angle.
Right.
Sure.
We point out a lot in the movie. And in the later, I think Walking Dead is worthwhile in part because he did start to, in the later arcs with Negan and all these other things, to get into the human evil potential side of it, when so much of it was really like those video games. Remember that first were arcade games?
Sure.
Oh yeah, the shooter game. Yeah.
The shooter games, which put you in the place of the guys with the guns shooting the zombies, which was a game changer.
Yeah, I never had a problem with the idea of exploring the human evil in Walking Dead. I just thought they kept doing it for season after season.
It became melodrama.
Yeah, that's but in its early seasons, especially Class A stuff. I mean, it was like they took a very, very dark and brutal and violent concept and made it work. I mean, but you
would have thought that would have been the mainstream.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Yeah.
Well, but equally, come on, if he has a kid growing up reading the Conan comic books that are now enshrined in hardback, and reading Robert Howard and reading Tolkien and reading all kinds of fantasy in the 70s. If you told me that the most popular show on TV was a giant sword and sorcery fantasy epic, a la Game of Thrones,
all the things that
that superheroes would be something that every regular adult was going to go see, and those things all seemed impossible 30 years.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I remember reading, I think it was a Starlog article explaining why superheroes don't work on film. And we now know, first, you have to actually like superheroes to make a good superhero film. And you might need a little money and some up-to-date special effects.
Yes, technology, filmmaking technology has caught up to the fact now that you can do that.
Now you can do it.
Because you're right. You couldn't in the 1970s. You had the Spider-Man TV show, and
I would argue the Japanese Spider-Man show was better than.
Yeah. But
if you've never seen that, Adam, do yourself a favor.
Now I'm gonna have to make a note. I'm up for that. The only other thing I would say that occurred to me from what you guys were talking about, the zombie and why the zombie, and it got me thinking about, we're talking monsters. I loved, even as a kid, because I was just a monster kid, right? Like I'm
sure, like all of us.
And I loved the kind of try to figure out I don't know what the word is. It's not the typology. It'd be like
Zeitgeist?
the biology world. Of kind of, what's the family tree of what's all these different there's a vampire.
The genealogy kind of.
And what the different ones are. And something about that had never occurred to me until listening to you guys before and talking about the threat of the zombie. And it said, there are monsters that are particularly frightening because they don't just kill you, but they infect you.
Right.
Right? Like if you get killed by Frankenstein's monster, you're not going to become Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
Damn it.
Right.
Right. That might be different. But if the Wolfman, the bite of a Wolfman, if you're not completely ruined,
right,
you would get the bite of the lycanthropy or whatever it's called.
Yes, you're
a vampire. It could kill you, but it will also turn you into a vampire.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, did again.
The most horrifying thing with the zombies was not just that it was going to kill you and eat you, but that in doing so, you would now become this something you weren't. You would become the monster. Even maybe devil and possession stuff has a bit of that.
Kind of, yeah.
That it might get in you and you might become a monster. That's a
body snatchers,
subcategory of monsters that spread contagious monstrosity.
That's true.
Yeah.
And that is where we are now. So
right. Yeah.
True. True.
Now, your show, Salem. I just started watching because there's a million shows out there.
Yes, I watched the pilot episode.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think that's one of the strongest pilots I've ever.
Yeah, good.
I mean,
really well shot.
It goes a bit like this, in part because there was all kinds of turmoil in doing it. I think it gets better and better. That was like the most fun I've ever had. I mean,
first of all, it looks beautiful.
Yes,
some really great actors. I mean, if we were talking John Sayles, you got Kevin Teague in the first episode.
Yeah.
What I love about
Stephen Lang, we get Stephen Lang for almost half the season.
Oh my God! Yeah, and Marilyn Manson. I mean, it's
Marilyn
like
Manson. You're not allowed to say Marilyn's name. We'll skip him.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
They've gone in and digitally removed him.
Okay. All right.
well, Adam, for listeners who are not familiar with it, could you tell them what Salem is about?
Yes.
So Salem was a show that came about on the very short-lived new network, just when networks were dissolving. Some geniuses decided to create a new one by extending WGN. But the show lives on Amazon everywhere but Netflix, I think, because Fox produced it.
Hulu has it, I think. Netflix. Yeah.
So Hulu has it. Amazon has it. In a nutshell, it's the Crucible. It's the Crucible if it had been written by Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard instead. The core premise is very simple. It's that in Salem, in the late 17th century, the witches were real, but they were actually running the trials.
Great idea.
It's a conspiracy. They're getting vengeance on this same group of Puritans who were slaughtering 90% of them back in the old country, in old Essex in England. Salem and Boston are in Essex County because everybody who settled there, the Puritans, had all come from Essex in England, which was actually the center of, it's like where Witchfinder General takes place. It's the British witch hunting and sort of the genocide of the witches. So they've cleverly come to this country at the same time, and they've found a way to turn the Puritans on themselves and get them to commit the crimes that they as witches could never get away with doing in order for purposes I will not reveal.
They're like the puppet masters.
Yes.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I was very impressed by the pilot, and
it
gets wilder. We got away with a lot there. It kind of almost got too gory, given that I intended it to be more of like a horror plus romance, to have a kind of historical romance element to it, and it has some of that. But WJ kept going, go more gore. We need more guys watching.
Yeah. And I was surprised at the nudity too. I was like, "Oh, okay."
Well, but
you got my attention.
We got a lot of nice. We got plenty of that. And
God bless you.
You got some hot witches in that show.
Yeah, we do. It's got a bit of a kind of Baba. It's a bit of an Italian horror.
Yeah,
it has a bit of that feel. It certainly does, especially in later episodes as it goes forward. Season 2, Lucy Lawless comes in and she's unbelievable.
I love her.
I can't get over how awesome she is.
Yeah.
Everything I see her
Lucy Flawless.
There you go. There it is.
Agreed.
Nice work, Larry Scott.
Battlestar Galactica to everything I see her in, she's just amazing.
Super versatile, super great.
The show has so many, in that pilot, there are so many disturbing images and scenes. It's like a Christmas present for me of just all the stuff that I like. Provocative storytelling, bizarre imagery, memorable characters, some great acting.
Yeah, really the acting. I'm proud of like the cast that was in that. I mean, not everybody's quite at the same level, which often happens in TV and TV like that, but there are some really outstanding people in that. Again, Seth Gable, who plays Cotton Mather, that character really comes on, or Ido Goldberg, who plays Isaac the Fornicator. the guy who gets branded.
Right.
By the way, it was a character who in the original pilot for that, he died. I killed him in the pilot. But everybody loved that character so much. And in particular, then we fell so in love with Idaho. He's just such an incredible actor. Who you might know him. He's great, especially in season 1 of Peaky Blinders, if you haven't watched that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
He plays the Jewish kind of Trotskyist agitator in that, and he's fantastic. He's so great. That character, goes from, without too many spoilers, he goes from being Isaac the Fornicator to, by season 3, he's kind of becoming like the town sheriff. I mean, there's a lot of fun.
Wow. Cool.
How do you make that F into an S, though?
I guess we have to watch the series.
And Adam, this was Brandon Braga also was
Yes.
involved. Like you guys, you created the show.
You work together.
We
Quite a
did. It was
bit.
wonderful. He was a huge, he's a lot of what allowed me to parachute in effect into television, because I had written a couple of pilots before that, one for NBC that didn't get made, and I had just written one other for Fox that, again, were pilots that they had paid for and really liked, but just because of the network system, and especially in a pre-streaming, this is just prior to the streaming.
Right.
Over. Very few are getting made. And I came up with the Salem idea with a producer then, and we took that to Fox 21. And at that point, having literally, I had written a couple pilots and had essentially written this, but had never made a moment of television. Though I had all this Corman background, I had basically just been viewed as a feature writer and script doctor for probably 20 years at that point. So, and the job of actually making a TV show, again, it's very physical. It's much more, you really are making the show. It's much more related to the act of directing and producing on set. So there was no sense of that. And from the get-go, they said, and I was totally cool with this, we need to find an experienced partner for you, in part because this idea is crazy. You clearly are crazy. We need to lay off some of the risk because we think it's really a show, but we need somebody who can do it. And they gave the initial document I had written that really went through the world and everything was going to happen to all these people. And I didn't know this, but the person they gave it to, someone they work with a lot, was Brandon. And Brandon and I were like brothers who had never met each other. It was so funny.
Wow, that's great.
That's awesome.
Big fan of his stuff. I'd never done science fiction, was very, only like, I wish I could do sci-fi like Brandon Braga. Look what he does. And he brought so much. I mean, even for people who are not Star Trek fans, the level of science fictional writing and creation that goes on in those shows.
Oh, yeah.
And period is unbelievable. I mean, it's
the Orville is
the Orville now. Yeah.
Yeah, is like, that's to me like the only surviving real Star Trek.
It's true. It's truer to the real spirit than the ways they're trying to do it now.
Right.
But he fell in love with that document, and they brought the two of us together, and it was a bit of a love at first sight. And what I didn't know, and I think even they didn't know, was that he was a deep, deep horror fan and had always wanted to do that.
Oh, wow.
It was really excited at the idea of doing horror. And I was
Yeah.
excited to work with someone doing, in a way, science fiction, because as I said to him right from that first meeting, I said, that's the key to how I would want to do this and how I've written this thing is none of this is made up. It's all done as if witchcraft is science.
Right.
Mhm.
And in part because it's gone back into the history of a period where witchcraft and science are all mixed up together.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Magic versus science. It's magic and science versus religion.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that messing with nature in that way. And everything in there, it may not be true in the sense that it really happened, but it's true in the sense that somebody believed this was possible or this was happening.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would like it to be like hard science fiction. The idea was to do like hard fantasy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, hard horror in that way, and to apply the kind of logic that he, as a really brilliant science fiction writer, had. And he loved that. So we had the best time getting to do that. And it was also great because the bargain when I was like, fine, you come all in with me. Because originally it would just be, I'm the creator, he's the showrunner. I'm like, no, you co-create, meaning your name goes on the pilot too. And it will go on whatever scripts I write initially until I started writing, eventually I'm writing all of them. And he was making the show, practically directing them. And then by the end, he was directing some of the best episodes and producing it and running a writer's room. And I'd never been, I thought this was a writer's room. A room like this, and one guy sits in alone, whereas Brandon, was the master of a room full of writers, which was a very hard transition for me to even get to. But by the time I experienced it through his guidance, so then in season 2 and 3, that was able to be kind of a teamwork thing where I could kind of have the room and he could have the set in effect. And that he would teach me what it would take to actually be a showrunner and not just say the writer or even the head writer, but to actually be in it physically again, which felt I hadn't felt that since I had been at Corman making Carnosaur and Brain Dead, and that degree of fun and participation. We got to do that a little bit, though, in a very truncated way just last year with Books of Blood.
I was going to say, I just watched that too.
Really fun.
It's really
directed, and he did a good job. It's a bit of a Carnosaur in the sense that I think because of things that happened with in the middle of the development of that, the Disney Fox thing happened, and then the Jason Clarke leaving Hulu and going to AT&T and HBO. So time and again, it got kind of shifted around and became it was originally an anthology series, and I wrote the first 2 episodes for and then it only was able to be made by becoming, in effect, a low-budget movie where those episodes got woven together into one, which was great in the sense that then it became something Brandon could make, which was great, and he did a great job and great cast. But
I did like the way that whole story came together.
Yeah. And he had the Clive Barker pedigree. I mean, that's, that's cool.
Yeah. It would have been nice to get to do those episodes as episodes and to keep doing the rest of the season, because we were going to do a whole bunch more stories from those collections, with Clive's very great.
Oh, wow.
But I think October of 2020 will go down in history as one of the most cursed months in television history. That kind of while everybody was watching streaming, anything that kind of came out new, either on networks or kind of on the more networky streamers like Hulu, just died on the line.
Yeah.
The other show
there's so much.
Yeah. Well, I think it was part of this too much, and there was also the pandemic kind of suddenly not ending in the fall, but realizing it was going to go on and get worse, and the craziness leading into the election. Yeah. I just think it was hard.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But yes, Brandon was great at that and is still great. And I'm sure we'll get up to trouble again someday.
Yeah.
Well, my answer for that is just to put Carnosaur on the TV and watch it, and all your troubles will be over.
And I would also like to point out that Bones.
That's what I just was going to bring it up.
Is a really good time.
Yes, it is.
It's a good time to revisit those films because they're all, because of the generation that's coming of age now, they're back on stream, but in particular for the kind of fetishists who would listen to a show like this, the 4K Blu-rays they're doing of movies like Bones and even Carnosaur is mind-blowing, and they're like treating them like Criterion discs,
I know, it's yeah. Well, but Bones is like a
lot of fun.
Bones is like a hip hop kind of urban Freddy Krueger revenge story.
Yeah, a little ahead of its time. It's often my fate. I think was true with Brain Dead, and it was very much true with Bones. To be, kids, if you're listening, you don't really want to be the first one in. It's better to right. Being too early is much worse than being too late, ironically. Not for your reputation, just for your livelihood.
Right.
But yeah, there are fun things in it, and Snoop is
cast is great. I mean, so in writing that, were you directly involved with Snoop Dogg at all?
Oh, totally. It was because originally.
What was that like?
Well, Snoop and I had the same agent at the time.
Oh my God!
Oh, okay. That's where it all came from.
Oh,
and it was Larry Kinnar, who was the agent at the time, was going on to do other things and really should have gotten to, if he had been a manager, he would have been a producer on the movie, but agents back then were not allowed to produce. He knew that Snoop liked horror movies. He knew that I was aware of and liked Snoop, and it was his genius idea. He literally called me up one day and said, do you think you'd like to do a horror movie with Snoop? And I'm like, well, maybe. Does he want to? Yeah, okay. Does he want to do a horror movie? And he said, yeah. He says he's totally into horror movies. I said, okay, you asked Snoop for me if he was going to do a horror movie, does he want to be the hero or the monster? And then you come back and tell me, and then I'll tell you whether I want to do it. And he called me back like 5 minutes later, and he said, no, Snoop said he totally wants to be the monster. I'm like, okay. I'm in. Well, and of course, he's the monster in the sympathetic old school.
The heroic monster.
The hero and the monster.
The idea, to be the hero and the monster, and to be a kind of High Plains drifter, as it were.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
And you got Pam Grier in there, who's fantastic.
Oh, gorgeous.
Your radio audience won't hear, but I have some souvenirs in my office.
Oh my God!
Oh, listeners, Adam is bringing something to show us.
And the only thing that means anything to my kids is this one. I don't know if you guys can see.
Oh, it's a picture of, is that you with Snoop?
Oh my goodness, folks!
That's
It's a
actually when we
picture
were
of
recording
Adam.
We're
and
just chilling on the
Snoop.
couch with
We're
Snoop.
just
Chilling on a
recording
couch.
the commentary.
Wait, are you smoking doobies there? Or are you like?
Smoking doobies? Yeah.
He actually fell asleep. You can actually, if you listen to I don't know if they kept on the new version, but the original commentary we did for the DVD release of that movie when it was first came out after the theatrical, it was in his little recording studio in his house where he makes a lot of his music, and that's where he and I and Ernest Dickerson, the wonderful director, that recorded the commentary, and he was way smoking it up. And in the middle, swear to God, there's a place where you can hear him kind of start to snore a little bit because he's like, kind of wakes up and just making goes, "Oh, I love this part." He was great. He was great around it. He was great on it, and he loved the idea. And so, yes, I came up with the idea for him, and very much based on really ideas I'd had since I was a little kid in the neighborhood the film takes place in, on the south side of Chicago, which is where I grew up in the American Nightmare era.
Right.
And part of my whole conviction was I was obsessed with Dracula and Dracula's castle, but it was living in this somewhat decayed and quite dangerous back then urban neighborhood where the scars of the rioting and of the burning were still there, in part because they weren't going to put up the money ever to fix it. I mean, to this day, stretches of like, 69th Street and other things like that, they're still look kind of like, parts of Baghdad. They never got rebuilt. And at the time, I think I'd always had that notion of like, could you have a Dracula that kind of, I wasn't thinking of it in terms of race, though race obviously did become a big part of it, especially once it's going to be Snoop. But just in the idea of, could you have that kind of Gothic horror in a purely contemporary urban American setting?
Right. I think Candyman probably comes the closest.
Candyman,
right?
The short story, had some of that. Yes, and the movie was probably the only. And yes, there were a couple of blaxploitation horror movies from when I was a kid that kind of touched on it, like Blackula.
Right.
But you didn't really have that, and I think the movie doesn't necessarily go. Again, it doesn't go as far as you could if you did it today. But I think it gets. There's a lot. It's fun. More in there than people think. I think.
Oh my God!
It's very fun.
There are some really ingenious
and some funny,
some funny stuff.
The
revenge story is great, but the visuals,
that wall of like bodies,
the variety of scares,
yeah,
and those practical effects. Oh my God, just love it.
The other thing that was totally Ernest and I bonded. I mean, parting the question of him directing it over our mutual love of the Italian horror films and of Bava in particular.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about it. In fact, if I have a real frustration with that film at all, it's that in the end, and it's not, I don't blame Ernest. I think it was in the end, the studio was going to do what it was going to do. We had really vowed to try to not do digital at all because we just, other than in very specific areas in terms of like shrinking the heads.
Yeah, you used it very, very sparingly, very well. Yeah.
And then at the end, they did a big thing with it that I just think doesn't look as good. And then they added something that had never been in the script where her eyes snap open and whatever. They had to do that thing that for a while people thought you had to end every horror movie like it was the end of Carrie.
Right.
Yes.
And that was not part of the original. But Ernest totally shared the idea that it should be done as if that he wanted to do a Mario Bava, where he was going to do everything in camera and everything physical in an era. And that, by the way, we did that very much on Salem. In Salem, Matthew Munger and the other guys who did that, it's incredible creature effects for all 3 years of that. And the only digital, almost without exception, that you've seen there is for the reality, not for the horror.
Right.
So to take the lake that was there in Louisiana that we shot on, because we built that whole town, and then we digitally turn that into the harbor that's going out with some boats.
Nice. Oh yeah, the boat out there.
Horror effects, that's all physical.
Which is great. I really do think that's come back around. Yeah. I mean, I hear that more and more now, filmmakers and everybody's saying like, we love practical effects.
Well, because they're scarier. I'm sorry. Yes. The others are more beautiful, but they're scarier.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a reason they have to be scarier because our brain evolved for 500 gazillion million years solely to be able to say, is that a tiger or not a tiger?
Exactly.
Right. When you see the beautiful digital tiger and it jumps at you, you're like, wow, it looks just like a fucking tiger, but you don't jump. Whereas if I just put it like this with my hand,
Yeah, yeah.
With the sock puppet from CARNOSAUR, you'll still
Right.
jump.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
The
and
limbic system still thinks it's a monster.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Brain dead. Brain dead.
dead.
Every time a needle goes into that brain,
That's right.
I
Yeah.
feel it.
That's right. Well, I think about it in relation to if they had made The Exorcist now, and they would have done a digital effect for her.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
all of it, yeah. Yeah.
No.
And yet that puppet, even though I remember even as a kid, and it's scarring me when I'm watching it, it's so scary. And part of my brain is going, it's a fucking puppet. And then part of me is going, oh my God, they turned her into a puppet. And I'm not a part of
The whole thing's so unnatural about it, but it's still but real, because it's real, it's right there. They're filming it.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes all the difference.
See, Adam, I didn't think it was a puppet. To me, it was like, how did she turn her head around? That maybe they got
Very
a
limber.
contortionist. I'm just saying, it fooled me. It fooled me.
And it's works, and it's great effects. But the mechanical, even if I actually think they don't. I think digital effects date too.
Yes. Early digital effects, when you watch them, you watch them now. Something you watched back in the early 90s, and you watch it now, it's like, oh my God, that's awful.
Watch The Relic.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
But actually, the great, if you actually watch those Cameron movies, especially the non-digital sections in them, or watch 2001. I took my kids to see 2001. My daughter, on the big screen, 70 millimeter at the Cinematheque, she did fall asleep. She's like, how don't they just land the ship? She's like, haven't they seen Star Wars? Just land the ship. She was impatient, but my son was blown away. But the point is, those effects don't date because they're
never
optically real. They're still real to the eye in some way. They're not actually. If they're fooling you the way a trompe l'oeil thing fools you with actual optics.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not with pixels.
Right.
Yeah. Like you watch any early horror film, like 90s horror film, with like a CGI transformation, into a demon face or something. It's so bad.
So bad.
It's like it's just completely takes you out of the movie immediately.
Yeah. But go back and watch Landis's big transformation scene in American Werewolf.
Of course. Yeah.
I wanted that to be even longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who is it? Is it Mexico that's just come out with the toy of the werewolf?
Yeah.
And it
looks
looks great.
Oh, I got to check this out. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right now. That was one they keep talking about making again. We'll see.
No.
Yeah. Well,
I love Landis, by the way.
Yeah.
When is he going to get his true due?
Yeah.
Really.
As a comedy filmmaker, as a horror filmmaker, as just an all-around filmmaker, and a guy,
Animal House is one of the greatest comedies ever made.
It's a perfect movie.
But look, Adam, I want to go out on a limb here and say, look, if you were to say Carnosaur is the only thing you ever did, if I were you, I would still be proud. And I want to thank you so much for making that film and doing such a bang-up job on it.
Yes,
we want a Carno thank you.
Yes.
It's true that
I know, because I've been feeling a little carnosaur. Thank you, guys.
But Adam,
I can't believe you Carna said it.
But gearing up for this episode, Adam, once I really looked into all your stuff, especially for genre fans, for Monster Kids, I mean, everybody from all the greats like Carpenter, Romero, to interview them, to doing things like with Roger Corman, to Snoop Dogg, to Clive Barker. I mean, you have a really fascinating career in genre stuff, in horror field.
It's certainly been, it's fun. And yes, and I try to take this to my kids who are like all kids and auditions are partly going, well, no, I want to make money and I want to do this, I want to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but look, I know people who've made a ton of money, but are really miserable. And yes, it's true. A lot of artists and a lot of quasi-commercial artists like your father and others who do okay, but are also always complaining.
Right.
The if you get to do something you love, I mean,
there's
nothing that replaces that. And I've certainly enjoyed that. The very part of it, Sean, that you're talking about, how do I say it? Like the fairy tales say, every gift is a blessing. What is the phrase? It's in there. It's from Grimm's.
Every rose has its thorn.
Every blessing is a wound. Every wound is a blessing, or a gift is a curse. Every curse is a gift. There's different versions of them. They come together. And the greatest gift or curse is to get to do what you loved, especially as a kid.
Yeah.
And because it keeps you in love with that state and in those things. And so, so the test I was constantly, for better and for worse, saying to myself throughout was, well, if suddenly, 15-year-old you was standing here, would he think that was any good? Would he be happy you did that? Would he have rather done that or something else? I could generally go, yeah, he would have been totally psyched.
Sure.
He wouldn't have been going, oh, dude, really? You should have done that one instead.
Right.
So I recommend that. Follow that inner 15-year-old, and it will lead you.
Absolutely. I agree.
We
Adam,
try.
Thank you so much for the.
Look behind me. I'm still
yes.
15 years old.
Adam, your words of wisdom. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time for us.
Absolute joy.
Great stories, man.
Yeah. And Adam, do you have anything that you would like to plug? Because this is the part of the show where we allow you to plug away shamelessly.
Plug away shamelessly. I'm working on all kinds of things. We will soon see. I've got 2 series that are in development, and hopefully they will be streaming to you soon. Both things you guys would be interested in. One from a great YA sort of horror series of books called The Devouring Gray that are really fun. I'm also doing with Jen Morrison and the folks at Ace. I've also fulfilling a lifelong dream to work with one of my best friends and the guy via whom I also was attracted to the Barker material, which is Michael Marshall Smith. Well, I think, among other things, one of the greatest horror writers of the late 20th century, but also a great thriller writer. And we've adapted for some great producers his 90s sort of conspiracy horror thriller trilogy, The Straw Men.
Okay.
And I would urge you, if you haven't, go stream the old stuff. Go watch.
Yes.
Certainly, if you haven't seen Salem, I'm pleased that it's still out there. And again, it was a little ahead of its time in its first to streaming 3 seasons lifetime. I'd like to see it survive. So in a funny way, with all the things I've done in this last period, the thing I'd most plug and get people to go back and watch if they haven't and give it a shot is Salem. I really think that will repay. The people who know it love it, and a lot of people don't know it, and especially the kind of people who would listen to lunatics like you guys.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you watch the pilot and if you don't want to watch more, something has gone wrong in your life.
Matt thinks the pilot's great. I think the pilot, and forgive me to the wonderful director and people who worked hard on that, it's almost my least favorite episode.
Great.
There are better episodes.
Even better.
And the pilot is pretty great.
It is great.
Yes.
Awesome.
Watch Salem and Witch Upon You. Witch Upon a Star.
Hey, so
all right, guys.
Maybe we should give a toast to our wonderful guest, Adam Simon.
I stone IPA with like a devil on it. So
cheers.
Cheers.
Good. All right. You guys are lucky. I'm actually on a very rare dry month that I do it once a year, and I kept delaying it this year. I'm like, okay, fine, because I would have been twice as incoherent if I was drinking along with you the whole time.
well, then we're going to have you back.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Please.
All right, guys. It's really,
thanks again,
really
Adam.
fun.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Have fun, guys.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Time for a listener shout out.
Shout out. Shout out. Carno, shout out.
Well, guys, since we've been talking so much about Carnosaur, I think it's only appropriate that we do a shout out to our listeners, our loyal, longtime Monster Party listeners who also worked on the effects team of that movie.
Nice.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm talking about Rod Matsui.
Oh,
Yes.
Rod, of course.
God.
Yeah.
Talking about Joe Caldwell.
Right, Joe.
Joe. Thank
And
you,
of course,
Joe.
And of course, Ted Haynes, who was a guest on our show.
That's
Ted
right.
Haynes, friend of the show, Ted Haynes.
That's right.
I would
Amazing
say
that-
just a good all-around friend.
Yes.
Indeed.
Some of us
That's
here.
right.
Indeed.
Yes, he
Yeah.
is.
Amazing that all those years ago, these talented guys all worked on that movie together, and they have become Monster Party listeners. And gentlemen, we appreciate it.
Yes, we do.
Also, another quick little informational shout out to our listeners and fans. If you are using our Monster Party Facebook page, we have had some difficulties with accessing some of the stuff on our page through our Monster Party account. So
Weird.
if you sent any direct personal messages to our Monster Party page, like in the last month or so, If you haven't gotten a response, it's because we're not able to access those right now. For a while, we weren't able to access them. And then little window period we were, and I was responding to people saying, sorry, we haven't got back to you. But now for some reason, I cannot access them anymore. So if you want to send like any kind of like message to us on Facebook, just post on our wall. Or of course you can use Instagram and Twitter as well. But if you sent a personal direct message to our Monster Party Facebook page last several weeks or more and haven't got a response, it's not because we're ignoring you.
Yeah, we swear we're not being dicks.
Yeah,
No.
we try to be really good about
what
getting
we
back to
normally
our-
are.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's why. So sorry about that. Well, hopefully that will be resolved.
What is up with that Facebook
Yeah,
page? I
it's
don't know.
very strange. Yeah,
Yeah, we've been having all kinds of problems.
Yeah,
And
so,
just
anyway.
being able to access it is this long circuitous method that we have to do to get on. It's I don't know what it is.
Frustrating.
But hey,
So
on
anyway.
a positive note, we'll hopefully we'll get it fixed.
We're gonna
And
get it
you can
fixed.
you can still reach out to us like
Or
Sean
just
said.
like come knock on our front doors. And
Oh,
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
about-
uh-huh.
no.
Yeah. Come and fix us.
Some of us don't need any fixing. Some of them are just perfect
really?
the way we are.
Boy, spoken by someone who sounds like they need fixing.
And, hey, as of now, California is officially open and maskless, apparently, in a lot of places. But
Pantsless.
But the Monster Party mask is even that much more collectible now.
Yeah, exactly. Think about that. It's like it's a capsule in time of like when we had to wear masks. So
yeah,
you can get a monster. It's going to be like you can tell your grandchildren.
But let's say somebody farts in the movie theater. You got your Monster Party mask.
You're fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Look,
it fits in your pocket.
No, I think Matt brings up a really good point. Look, you could say, hey, you could say, hey, this whole thing is settling down. Look, I think if you feel like you have a cold, if you have allergies or something, if you get this mask, it's always nice to carry around with
you just want to look cool.
And you can put on the Monster Party mask. It would still serve a functional purpose.
Or you could buy two and then sew them together to make a bra.
Ooh.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Come on.
I've done it. I'm wearing it now.
Or you could sew together more than two and make it the Monster Party mask centipede.
Okay.
There you go.
Now, James, we have some masks left. It's not like we have a ton. So if you do want one, you should get it.
Now's the time.
Probably you should get it now. Yeah, now's the time.
Otherwise, you're going to find them on eBay for going for like hundreds of bucks.
Oh man, you're going to go up in value. All those masks.
Don't get the bootleg ones. Get the real ones.
These are authorized.
No, you have to get them from our eBay store, which is Monster Party store, except no substitute.
No, don't.
Right.
Don't try to make these at home. You'll fail.
You'll also find on our eBay store T-shirts, the Monster Party glow-in-the-dark classic logo T-shirts, still available in several sizes, and shipping is free still.
Are you kidding?
Oh,
Such a deal.
Got the Carnosaur up.
Yeah.
Really?
See, I mean, Roger Corman wouldn't offer that.
Yeah.
No.
No. But we don't care. We're all doing very well.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And if you're a Patreon member, you also get free stuff along with your purchase.
Wait, whoa. What?
I know. It just gets better and better.
What kind of free stuff?
All brought to you by the Unis Corporation.
A carton of infected eggs. We'll send you that.
Yeah.
You get collectibles from Biff Bang Pow Toys, courtesy Jason Lindsay, and also collectibles courtesy Ted Haynes.
Ted Haynes. That guy keeps giving.
I know. It's amazing. So Patreon, right? To be a Patreon member. What's that all about?
Well, Patreon is this. It's a platform that you can join. And when you join it, you are able to have access to bonus video, bonus audio, this wonderful deal that we just described with the t-shirts and the masks and everything. And you get some downloaded books. We might even provide some other things down the line that are even better than what we just mentioned, that we're still like, our brains are always working. We're always trying to come up with something new and exciting and now.
That's right.
Surprises.
Yeah.
Surprises to come.
But we've got some great videos there.
Oh my God. Well, Larry Strothe has Larry's Toy Time.
And again, this is not something we're putting up on YouTube. It's only for our Patreon.
Only.
Yes.
Patreon patrons. They call them patrons.
Yes.
And videos from our trip to Japan, our epic trip, and you know, we
unedited. Well, I mean, kind of edited, but extended.
Yeah.
Extensive.
Stuff that's too hot for TV.
Oh man.
This
you know what?
is turning into an epic miniseries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens in a tiny hotel room in Tokyo needs to be seen by the world. Oh man. You know, you throw the space giants on the TV and things start getting hot.
Wait, did we film anything in the capsule hotel?
Did we?
I hope so.
I think I feel like we must have.
That might be a little racy.
I hope. Yeah. Because you know what? In the capsules, if we haven't told you before, but when you're lying in your capsule, you got a little TV and you can watch, you know, your regular
news,
standard
a cartoon,
Japanese TV
drama,
sure. But 2 channels of pornography.
Pixelated.
I missed that. I totally missed that.
Of course you would.
Larry, I was depending on you with your flip cam. I hope you captured some of that.
I mean, it's unfair to ask Larry to go to bed with his flip cam.
I guess.
I don't think I want to see that footage.
I think
a lot of forced perspective, by the way.
No, I think I filmed some stuff inside the cube in the tube.
I hope so.
Oh, you did? Okay, all right. Well, anyway, I'm sorry you missed the porn, but
look, the point is, this is footage.
Next time.
We don't even know what's in there. So
yeah, it's true. We watch stuff like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. You know,
there's
and watching those videos, there have been moments like that where I went, oh, I don't remember that. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I know.
Or it sparks a memory. You go, oh, that was a good time. Remember when we were happy?
Remember when Matt was complaining? Remember that?
Well, that's today. That's that never changes.
When every single Japanese person we met would get a Monster Party flyer, and we try to describe it to them, and
chocolates,
and chocolates from you,
yeah,
brilliant.
Everybody was so nice to us. It just that's like another world.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but so you know, join the Patreon. It's get this, all of these treasures, $5 a month.
You're kidding.
$5 a month. Yeah.
That's nothing.
We had a little personnel problem. It was, well, I don't want to get into it too much, but we have someone who works for the organization called Phyllis. I mentioned her in some previous episodes, and she's responsible for this whole $5 a month thing. I thought we had agreed that it was going to be a higher price, but she, through some snafu, $5 a month. Well, this is what's happened since the last time we talked about Phyllis. There's been some embezzling. She has left the country, as far as we know. And she's taken a lot of our money and action figures.
Oh.
But that being said, you know what? We don't care. It's still $5 a month.
That's right.
Yeah. You know what? We'll grow again. We've already hired somebody new.
Who's that?
Gladys.
I thought it was Hortense.
Hortense is the one who almost got the job.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it really matters who got the job.
He was in the running.
Yes.
All right. Cool.
All right.
Well, maybe let's remind our listeners that you can find us on Facebook and YouTube at Monster Party TV. Our Twitter handle is at Monster Party HQ. Our Instagram is also Monster Party HQ. And hey, we would love to hear your thoughts. So please take a moment, write a review on the platform you're listening to us on. We will read it on the air.
Yes, like a dinosaur. Or let me correct myself, a carnosaur.
Or like a thesaurus.
Oh, man. man.
Boom.
Boy, we are having fun. This is you know what? This is a fun show. This is fun. On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James GONIS.
Keep America strong.
And watch anything made by Adam Simon.
Brought to you by the UNIS Corporation.
You know, we're all married, and we understand that sometimes the wife wants a space. That can we not have so much, the monster stuff out? And so
well, when my wife and I, when we lived in this condo, this was 2 bedrooms, and the bottom half was basically like a studio apartment, and I had my stuff, and we kept trying to put up those the lines of demarcation. And every once in a while, there'd be some bleed, and I knew when I overstepped my boundaries.
Bleed,
because there'd be like an action figure on the bed, which meant this has to go someplace, but not here.
I've actually been
Matt,
thinking that the action figure on the bed was some kind of secret symbol in your house.
Well, it's
too. Yes,
Adam. I don't want to give away all our secrets. It's both.
But Adam, the thing, I love Matt's collection. He has a wonderful, amazing.
This is a new thing, by the way, Adam.
No, I'm just.
It used to be for the first 10 years of our friendship, shitting all over everything.
Yeah.
Nothing I could do was ever good enough.
No,
because he has the best collection.
No, that's not true.
It is kind of true.
But no.
Boys.
There'll be a lot of this bickering, Adam, by the way, through all this.
Warning.
I was always a big fan and an admirer of your collection and Shawn's collection. I was.
We are of yours.
Yes. But I was just telling Adam, that you're some kind of collector when you go into the master bathroom and you go to use the toilet, and there on the toilet is, let's say, an Ultraman face and shelves of Ultraman stuff. And I'm looking around going, this is the master bathroom. I would use this to take a shower. I don't want to damage my toys by putting them all over these shelves, but he just...
But they don't get damaged. I know.
You really? Oh, are they all made out of rubber? Is that what it is?
No, they're made of plastic.
And how do some of those joints put together? How are they put together?
Well, he cakes them in the shower with him, and he puts a little, things on them, and sometimes in the bath,
cleans them. Yeah.
I cover them in Vaseline.
Okay. Not Godzilla. That would have hurt.
So, Adam,
horror comes in many flavors.
I mean, really quickly, are you like Mr. Book guy? You got a bunch of books. Do you have figures too? Do you have?
He has to pigeonhole
you. See, I think up there's some. If you could see, I don't know. I don't think I can tilt my computer down.
No.
But
just
the
tell
whole
us.
Field in front of me is. We got guys.
Oh, nice.
Oh, Ultraman! Hey, wow, nice.
We got. I mean, and some that not for the kids.
Oh, that's yours. Great. Oh man,
he's already like a 5th member.
I know. You might as well sign the contract.
It's my favorite.
Lion Maru. Lion Maru.
Nice.
Have you ever watched that show?
No, and I had no idea even what it was. One of the things where I was in that, I'm sure you guys know this place. It's like on the edge of Little Tokyo. It's like a all toys
jungle. Yeah.
And then they have like behind the glass the like odd and rare.
Yeah.
So my greatest finds there were that. I didn't even know what it was. The kid who was working there was like, oh yeah. To pretend like I knew. I was like, yeah. I just thought he just spoke to me. And the other one, I also don't know where this is from, but this has gone from office to office. You guys will know what it comes from. I don't know what it is.
Wait a minute.
Move it a little closer.
Yeah. Hold it.
Oh no, it's fairly indestructible. So it's just
is it a train? It's a train.
It's a train, but that's just going off into the sky.
Oh, it's a spaceship Yamamoto?
No. It's Queen Esmeraldas. It's Captain Harlock.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Captain Harlock.
Galaxy Express.
There you go.
That's it.
Right, James?
Yes. So yes, I got
Awesome.
lots of toys, but I've limited them in part. Well, what happened was I have kids when they were little. So first off, there was the whole thing of like, no, you can't. They're can they play
Those
with
are
them or not?
daddy's toys.
Yes.
Daddy's toys.
Yes.
Then it was, oh, wait a second. I can get ones that I really like by pretending they're for them, and my wife can't say anything. That worked pretty good. And then you're like, wait, that's my rare Hellboy golem, and you just ripped his arm off thing, which I still have painful regrets about. And then that's fine. Then they got lots of them, and then they've been aging out of them, and I'm like, yeah, I'm taking that one back.
Right. Sure, you don't want that one anymore.
Yeah, books.
The trauma is going to be that this, which has another room behind it, more film,
nice,
and a little thing behind it, and a bathroom in the middle. But that is about to become the kids' bedrooms, because right now
I see.
I've got a 14-year-old and a 14-and-a-half-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl sharing.
No, you can't have that.
Doesn't really work. Yeah.
So I'm going to have to make the ultimate sacrifice. And
you're a good dad.
Yes, a good dad. Yeah.
You have living, breathing action figures. They're actually human and can grow.
That's true.
These are our children. They never talk back.
Yeah, and they don't remind you at every moment that time is passing and you're getting older.
Right.
This is the main thing I've realized about people when you have, because I have friends exactly my age and they don't have kids, and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot that I'm this age. I forgot 10 years just went by. Like if you saw a little creature go from this to that in time, you can't hide from it.
Yeah.
True.
That's a horror story right there.
Yeah.
Probably a Cronenberg movie.
Yeah. Let's make it. I'm already setting up the meeting.
Well, the horror version of fatherhood or parenthood, you know.
Right.
But with body horror.
Yes.
Well, of course.
Yeah, that's what I felt fatherhood was missing.
Oh, body horror.
Wait,
yeah.
Fatherhood or parenthood?
Parenthood, whatever. Both of them. Both those movies.
Much better. Everything's missing a little body horror. Let's be frank.
True.
Yeah.
The Parenthood movie with body horror, I'm telling you, if we can get Cronenberg on board, boy, would that be a much better movie.
Yeah. Well, you know, The Brood is both motherhood and fatherhood. It's sort of divorce fatherhood.
That's true.
It's one of the greats of that.
All like new parents should watch that movie.
Required viewing.
I think Sean has.
If your in-laws sent you like those little footy pajamas for your kids, and then you watch that, and you're like,
I
want to cosplay that at Comic-Con.
I'm still waiting for I'm still waiting for the action figures of those little guys.
I know, right?
Somebody's gonna make those.
Hey guys, we should do that for when they open up conventions again. We should all get little
my son
onesies.
was asking me what happened to Comic-Con. I'm like, not this year.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Next year.
Yeah.
It's gonna be weird going back, don't you think?
Yeah.
I think
nice.
Strange.
I think people are going to be so excited. I think people are dying.
I have to be honest. I think that I might feel a little bout of agoraphobia.
Oh, like
initially.
Come on.
Yeah.
Really?
Crap. When you get packed in.
I mean, that place gets really packed. And at my best, I was able to wade through it and be okay. But after all this solitude, it's just gonna be strange. That's all. I think I'll enjoy it, but it's gonna be weird, I think. A little bit.
I walked into Target without a mask the other day, and that felt strange.
How dare you?
That felt
No, until Tuesday, it all opened up here. I was in the grocery store, which was the place that I was always most. I brought this just in case we wanted to be extra safe.
Right, sure, right, yeah.
But then I feel like Frank in Blue Velvet. And it was funny because they had taken down. It was clear that everything was fine. You could come in. The carts were no longer inside, having been sprayed with insecticide. They were outside again. You could come in, everything. But still, every single one of us went in with the mask. And then you could see that moment where we're looking at each other like, are we? Do we? What?
Yeah,
it's a weird transition.
Are we doing this?
I know.
Just like with everything, I want the test subjects to go in without the mask first.
Right.
And then we'll see how that goes.
It's funny, Adam. I came from the store before I came on the show, and I wasn't even thinking about it. And it's just I'm so conditioned. When I got out of the car, I automatically put the mask on, and I walked around. And in the store, there were people that had their masks on, and I guess I really wasn't looking for it, but I mean, people are still doing it.
Yeah. Well, maybe they're not vaccinated and they're actually obeying the rules.
Yes.
Wow.
I am completely vaccinated.
What a conscientious town this is.
Yeah. Oh,
It is.
That's why we're
We're
yeah.
just good people.
I want more. I'm signing up. I want a third, fourth. Give me
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I'm taking everything. I want all of them. I want to collect them all.
Exactly. Let's do it.
And then have one in the package.
Yeah.
Well, this is great.
Yeah.
This is great banter. But
Hey,
I'm so thrilled to have Adam here. I think maybe we should kind of
I agree with you.
get to the
Yeah.
show.
Hey, and Adam,
I thought we were just hanging out.
well, Adam, if you don't mind,
no.
Adam, if you don't mind, what we do is we take a little bit of this banter that we do in the beginning, and then we put it at the end as like a little extra after the show segment, if that's okay with you.
It's look, you guys get final cut. That's
All right. Oh, hey.
Nice. Wow.
Okay.
Oh, I'm dying to ask you about Final Cut. Dying to.
And if we go for like, hour and a half, is that okay for you, or
We'll see. I may get incoherent by that point, but
at any point, if you're like, hey, I'm running out of gas here, and let's wrap it up.
Perhaps if he finds one of us a little annoying or insensitive, perhaps
yeah.
Adam, welcome to our world.
I'm just saying, sometimes,
Right.
let's all.
Okay.
We're thrilled to have him here.
Yes.
Great.
Thrilled
Yes.
to be.
Creep out the guests right from the get-go. Okay.
Now,
All right. Well,
he knows what the topic is, right?
So yes, and so hey, Larry, why don't you let him know? No, you would like to do this to tell him how we start the show.
Well, Adam, what we do, how we start the show. I'm sure you listen to the show all the time, but just as a reminder, what we do is
Long
Matt
time listener, first time caller.
okay. Matt introduces the show with a creepy voice, and we introduce ourselves. Then we introduce the show, the topic, and we say what the topic is. And then we introduce our guest, and that's when we go to town. But so that's the way it works.
Okay.
That's the way it is.
I'll wait for my cue.
All right.
For your cue.
It'll all become sparkling clear. So okay, so let's get going then. A little moment of silence, and I'll get right.
The title you have this, Sean.
CARNOSAUR Knowledge: A Guide to Filmmaking with Adam Simon.
Nice.
Yes, we can make it longer.
No, I think that's long enough.
Okay, good. Okay, all right, here we go.
I think we're going with Adam Simon's Guide to Filmmaking. Is that it?
What?
No.
It's not.
It's our knowledge. There's like 6 people that will get that joke, but we love them.
Yeah,
That's what we're hoping for.
No, that's not what we want. We don't want just 6 people in the audience to get
and
it.
Margaret will get it. So that's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
Does she listen to our show?
Of course she does.
Always.
Okay.
I don't know if she's ever been in a horror film. But...
Magic.
Yep. That's right. Yep.
I stand corrected.
Okay.
I stand corrected.
Larry, I have to say, you look like you're kind of in The Ring. You know the film that you see in The Ring?
Ring?
The woman in the oval mirror behind you? Yeah.
Oh,
I'm expecting her to show up any second. It looks with the lighting. It looks just like
I
that.
like it. Spooky.
that's the plan. That's the
Yeah. In this day and age, sometimes don't you want to also just climb down a well and
Yes.
get away from it all?
Oh, yeah.
At times.
Okay, well, guys, we've been talking so much about Roger Corman that I feel like I should share my own personal Corman story.
Sure.
Oh, wow, please.
I want to hear this.
Because I do have a firsthand experience. About 21 years ago, when I was working at Playmate Promotions at Playboy, the Roger Corman studio, New Concord at the time, approached me about hiring 2 Playmates to be in a remake of a Roger Corman movie he had made with Pam Grier back in the 70s called The Arena. And the reason he wanted to remake The Arena is because it was a Roman gladiator story, and Gladiator had just won Best Picture.
Of course.
He wanted to rush a sexy female gladiator picture into Blockbuster.
Nice.
So he ended up hiring the Playmate of the Year at the time, whose name was Karen McDougall, and another Playmate from that year, whose name was Lisa Durgan. And he hired both of them to film this movie, and where he was making at least a few of his pictures back then was in Eastern Europe because it was a lot cheaper.
Of course, yeah.
This movie was going to be shot in St. Petersburg, Russia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, they hired the two girls. The girls were paid 10 grand a piece, which was not a lot of money.
So was it an actual script that was done? I mean, was it actually going into production?
Did they have lines?
They had lines. Lines. This was
Was there nudity?
There was nudity. This was an English language picture that was going to be shot there. The director was a guy named Timur Bekmambetov, who.
Oh yeah.
Well, back then, he was a Russian director who Corman had hired. He would go on to make a movie in Russia called Night Watch, and a sequel,
wow,
and a sequel called Day Watch, and then he would be brought
Those
to
are
Hollywood.
big movies, yeah.
And then he would be brought to Hollywood to make Wanted with Angelina Jolie, and then Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Nah.
But this was before all of that. So I accompanied the girls to St. Petersburg to help them get assimilated for the first 3 or 4 days.
Wait a minute. Whoa. You're going to help them get assimilated.
Well, I was their manager, and this was far, this was a long way from Hollywood. So we didn't know what the hell we were walking into. This is Russia, okay?
Hey, they can't pay $10,000. Come on.
Hey, did they get per diem?
The
answer is no. Okay.
This was what it ended up being all about, because I ended up having to lobby for the girls to get things like cell phone usage, because this was back when not everybody had a smartphone.
Right. Sure.
Things like
food
and water in their rooms. The first couple of days were in this really nice hotel right in the middle of St. Petersburg, but the movie was going to be shot at a location that was about an hour away from St. Petersburg on the coast of the Baltic Sea, in the middle of fucking nowhere.
Wow.
And we were staying in some former military barracks. They were trying to turn into a hotel, completely empty.
Igor's Pleasure Village.
It was the Overlook. This place is completely empty.
Oh my God.
We're the only ones in there. And the longer that I was there, the more it became apparent that the girls were scared and miserable.
Wow.
And
I'm scared and miserable just hearing.
We were driving to the location at night. And again, we were the only Americans here. Yeah, the line producer was there. He was American, but absolutely everybody else was Russian.
But was there a translator, though? How did you communicate with people?
There was a translator. It's this sort of meek little Russian girl who I kind of felt sorry for.
Oh,
Oh my God.
And we're driving there one night to the location, and it's pitch black, and we're driving through these forests that are endless. And one of the girls is weeping in the car.
Sounds like the beginning of Suspiria, where she's driving in a cab to the freaking ballerina.
So
wow.
The Human Centipede.
Then we get to the barracks, and it's even worse because they don't have heaters in the rooms. And I'm having to talk to the line producer and be like, look, the girls need this, the girls need that. And he's like, well, I'll call Roger. And the girls are telling me, I didn't agree to this. Fuck the contract. I'm going back home. So what was supposed to be a 4-day stay for me turned into 10 days. During all that time,
wait a minute. You took over their roles?
Well, I learned what it finally really meant to be a manager in the heat of the moment in really shitty circumstances. So, little by little, they got enough to keep them comfortable because they were supposed to stay there for a month. I was only supposed to be there for 3 days, but they were not ready to stay there for a month. So I stuck it out. I made sure that, I didn't have anything to gain by keeping them in the production. I could have said, okay, you know what, girls, let's get on the next plane back. But I was like, look, we've gone through all this. Let's, this show must go on, right? So finally, they agreed to everything that the girls wanted. The girls were still in primitive conditions in the middle of nowhere, but finally it was set, okay, they were going to go through with it, and I could fly home. I was still getting calls back in LA in the middle of the night where they had set some stunt guy on fire. It was like, again, this was a very, very no budget Russian production.
Wow.
But I can safely say without any fear of contradiction that I single-handedly rescued a Roger Corman production.
Yay.
Wow.
So did this movie
Go,
ever come out?
Gonis.
It came out. It was.
What is it called?
It's called The Arena. He was
starring James Gonis.
He was going to call it Gladiatrix, but for some reason he decided to stick with The Arena.
So it's like, okay, it's the same title as the original Pam Grier.
Yes, right.
Okay.
And it's beautifully shot. The director did know what he was doing.
Right.
He looked a little like a Ridley Scott type thing, but and there's a lot of TNA in it. But
I'll look for it.
How dare they?
If I hadn't lobbied for the girls, there was no way they would have stayed there. And I don't know what Corman would have done.
Right.
And I
hired two Russian girls.
I ran into him one night in a restaurant, and I sort of cornered him, and I told him the whole story, and he said, "Oh yeah, that movie did well."
That's all that matters.
That was the takeaway. Yeah,
that's
a great story.
Yeah,
that's a great story.
There you go.
Nice.
He's influenced us all in different ways.
Hasn't James saved all our productions? Really? At some point or another.
And Matt, you have no idea.
Yeah.
No idea. I would say our trip to Japan was a production.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for James,
kept it on the
it would have been shit.
Yeah.
But James did a wonderful job.
Oh, when I think about how much, look, it was all of us. We all kind of rallied, and considering how much we were able to do in that amount of time, and
we were a well-oiled machine.
Yeah,
it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
And everybody brought their own little piece of wonderfulness to the country of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And they appreciated it, I think.
Yeah, I think they're still talking about us.
They are. At least at Godzilla, yeah.
Time for listener.
You just channeled Sean.
I think I just channeled Carnosaur. Okay.
Carnosaur in the throat.
A little Charlie Callis there. Time for listeners.
Or the Foster Brooks.
Foster Brooks, yeah, that'll work too.
I think it's actually more Foster Brooks in my case.
Okay, all right.